Jack, while they're doing all this tech stuff, I only wish to speak as a Ward Councillor of the Dry Street one. I'm not here as a group leader.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, members of the public, officers. Thank you for joining us for the Planning Committee meeting this evening. This is a meeting that is being held remotely, and we are recording the meeting tonight, and it will be available on the Council's website and on YouTube following the meeting. Please note that any comments posted on the chat feed of the Council's YouTube channel during the recording will not be monitored by the Council. All mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. Please switch your profile to mute unless you are speaking. The procedure for each item is that the planning officer will present their report and committee members will then have time to ask any points of clarification. The planning officer will then read out any written statements from any members of the public on a particular item. Following this, the meeting will be adjourned to enable those who have given notice that they wish to address the committee on a particular application that they are able to do so. Each person will be invited to join the meeting via Zoom and will have 3 minutes to give their views. There will be a timer from Karina that will indicate the amount of time that someone will have. The timer will go off 30 seconds, so at 2 minutes 30 seconds, to let the member of the public know that they only have 30 seconds left to continue their presentation. If the member of the public that wishes to address the committee is a ward councillor or a councillor, they will have 5 minutes, in which case to address the committee. Once all comments have been given, the meeting will be reconvened for members of the committee to discuss the application and reach a decision. As in previous remote meetings that have been held, I will ask each member individually whether they wish to address the application, whether they wish to ask any technical questions of clarification, and separately whether they wish to make any deliberations. Any member that has any questions will be able to continue their run of questions, and then I'll repeat at the end of the application whether any member wishes to come back and address the committee again. Agenda item number 1, apologies for absence.
We have Councillor Schrader substituting for Councillor Carol Morris for the duration of today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 2, any declarations of interest. So again, I'll go around each member individually, and I will declare first of all that I have been lobbied on item number 4 and item number 7. Councillor Kettle. Sorry, Councillor Kettle, you're on mute.
I keep forgetting the mute button. Yes, I've been lobbied on item number 4.
Thank you. Councillor Reid. Sorry, Councillor Reid, I can't hear you.
No?
Yep.
I've been lobbied on agenda item 4 also.
Thank you. Councillor Rimmer.
I have also, well, there was an attempt at lobbying, but I haven't replied or taken their calls.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Yeah, just the one in my ward, Chairman, that I'm bringing tonight, and many thanks for putting it on the agenda for me.
Thank you. So just for clarification, that's item number 6, Councillor Turner.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Schrader.
Yes, so let me just quickly get the agenda up in front of me. I declare an interest in item 7, insofar as I've not actually been lobbied on this particular application, I have to say, but I have been lobbied in the past on applications concerning this site, and I have done casework in relation to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schrader. Councillor Fellows.
Yes, Chair. I've been lobbied on item number 4.
Thank you. We now go to the minutes of the previous meeting. So again, I'll ask each member individually whether they're voting in favour, against, abstentions, not voting on the minutes. So Councillor Kettle.
I'm for.
Thank you, Councillor Reid.
For.
Councillor Rimmer.
For.
Councillor Turner.
Yeah, 4.
Councillor Schrader.
Abstain.
Councillor Fellows.
4.
And I will also be voting in 4, so with 6 in favour and 1 abstention, the minutes have been carried. We now go on to item number 4, planning application number 20/00077/REM Nethermain in Basildon, which is on page 27 to 47 of your agenda, and I'll hand over to Mr. Benson.
minutes. Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. The application site comprises an area of some 13.2 hectares known as Phase 2 and forms part of the wider Nevermain development, which occupies a total site area of 50.2 hectares. This application is a resubmission of Phase 2 for the Nevermain site, which previously proposed 192 homes with 622 square metres of local retail space, associated landscaping, car parking and open space. This new application has been submitted following an update to Red Rose Heritage Collection house types, changes to the layout and changes to the phasing plan. The aerial view shows the application site in context with the wider Nevermain development, which obtains outline planning permission in December 2013. The Nevermain development is being built out in a phase-by-phase basis. Phase 1 is substantially built out and occupied with the final new homes under that phase under construction. We can go on to next one. So just go back to the previous one. So this is the slide that's currently shows the previous Phase 2 reserve matters application that was submitted before committee and was granted. And if we can go on to the next slide, please, Charles. Thank you. So this slide shows the most up-to-date phasing plan and the relationship of Phase 2 with the other phases. So this new Phase 2 is the yellow coloured area on the site plan. So it covers a much larger area than the previous Phase 2. So this application seeks reserve matters consent for the development of Phase 2 for 315 new homes, comprising 97 3-bed, 133 4-bed homes, along with 45 1-bed and 40 number 2-bed apartments, associated car parking, landscaping and roads. The purpose of the reserve matters application is to provide further detail on what was approved at the outline planning application stage. Specifically, further detail is provided on appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. Means of access was previously approved as part of the outline planning application. In terms of consultations, the consultation exercise generated 9 representations from neighbouring properties. 225 properties were notified, along with site and press notices. The key considerations for this application relate to appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. In terms of appearance, Phase 2 comprises traditional family housing with a mix of detached and semi-detached houses, incorporating private rear gardens and on-plot car parking with a proportion of bays for visitor parking. The new homes in Phase 2 will reflect the style and design of the homes in the earlier phases. Flat blocks also form part of Phase 2, comprising 1- and 2-bed apartments, with one block incorporating a mix of commercial and residential use. In terms of soft landscaping, Phase 2 has been designed with the bulk of the soft landscaping given over as private garden areas, along with 4 landscape character areas. 44 new trees of extra heavy standard size and 158 new trees of heavy standard size are proposed, the majority of which would be native species. In terms of hard landscaping, the roads and pavements would be black tarmac with permeable block paving to serve the driveways and car parking spaces with concrete paving slabs used for paths to the front doors and for rear patio areas. Boundary treatments would comprise a mix of garden brick walls and a 1.8 metre high close boarded fencing, which continues the theme established in earlier phases of the development. In terms of layout, Phase 2 has a main public access road running broadly through the site, with secondary roads leading off of the spine road, creating multiple clusters of residential development. In terms of scale, Phase 2 represents that of a typical family housing environment with building heights ranging between 2 and 2.5 stories, where accommodation is provided in the roof space, interspersed with single-story garages, which mirrors the early phases. It is worth noting to members that one visitor bay from Phase 3B has been provided within this phase, and the local equipped area of play, which was proposed as part of Phase 3B in the parameter plans, has also been incorporated into Phase 2. In conclusion, the proposed design and layout of Phase 2 follows the form established for Phases 1, 3A and 3B, and is considered to be in general conformity with the outline planning permission. The application is therefore recommended to members for approval, subject to the conditions identified at the end of the officer report on pages 41 to 45 of the agenda pack. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benson. If I could just ask all members, if you're not speaking, to please put your microphones on mute, just not to interfere with the sound or the recording. That'll be great. Thank you. We now go into technical questions for clarification. And Councillor Fellows, do you have any technical questions that you'd like to ask?
Yes, yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Benson, you said that I think about 150 new trees are being planted. Do we have a number of trees that will have to be removed as part of this development? If I can come back, I've got further clarification, please, Mr. Chairman.
Just while Mr. Benson's looking to answer that question, just to reiterate that I'll allow all members to ask their technical questions for clarification in a run of thread without having to keep on coming back to ask.
So the loss of trees will be 77 trees, which includes a variety of categories. So there's, in the report, it lists there's 13 B category, 48 C category, and 16 U category trees. And that is to do with whether they're moderate quality and their estimated life expectancy.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I note in the report it says that a badger set is being relocated. It's a great shame we have to disturb any wildlife. Because of the nature of that general area, it's adjacent to an SS1, I think. Are there any ponds or of that nature that are being disturbed or being removed?
Sorry, Councillor Fellows, is that any ponds on top of the badger set that are being removed as well?
Yes, as I say, the badger set has been relocated. That'll come as a surprise to the badgers, I'm quite sure. But are there any wildlife ponds? Because I know that up in that general area that there are several.
I'm not sure if there have been any ponds that are being relocated at all.
Okay. Final question, Mr. Chairman, if I may. This is under the permitted development from the previous planning agreement 7 years ago. The fact that there has been a significant change, is that still within the spirit and also the law of the previous planning application?
Thank you, Councillor Fellows. I'll ask Ms. Lyons to address that point.
Firstly, this isn't permitted development. The application in 2012 sought outline consent for a sum of 725 units. This is a reserve matters application that seeks to deal with the matters that were reserved as part of that outline consent. So what we've now got is an application in front of us for 315 units, which obviously makes up that 720 units which this site has to deliver as part of its allocation that was set out in the plan. So it's a cumulative number of units. So as the development is now seeking to deliver 315 units on a larger site and meets all our standards, and there's not an issue with regard to that. So it is a lawful application.
Thank you, Councillor Fellows. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In relation to the blocks of flats, how high are these going to be, and how much higher than the actual houses are they going to be? And also with the commercial stroke retail, do we know how many retail places there are going to be, and have we had any interest? Because we have had other properties being built with retail space underneath, but they just sit empty, which isn't, it's a bit of a waste of space if the retail isn't taken up. Thank
Mr. Benson?
So with regards to the block of flats, so these will be 3 stories in height. So in comparison to the remainder of or the rest of the site with the houses, the houses are proposed to be 2 and 2.5 stories. So they would only be an additional story or half a story higher.
And on the retail units?
Sorry, what was the question again on the retail units?
So whether there had been any expressions of interest in the retail units?
So there isn't an established end user at the moment of the retail units at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Do you have any further technical questions? Thank you. Councillor Turner?
None for me, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Kettle?
Not at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Rimmer?
Yeah, I've got a few questions actually on this. So thank you. It's really about what we can do as a committee at this stage with this application. So there's elements of the design that I'm not particularly happy with, and I've raised these concerns before. And it's this shared area in terms of pedestrians and in terms of road usage, and whether that is something it's a question if that's something we would be able to address in terms of this application. Another element is the actual affordable housing quota and the percentage there. There's 5% affordable housing, and that seems rather low. And I don't know if that's because of when this was first appraised, that we had different conditions in place, and whether that could be readdressed this time round. Especially as 50% of the 5% is to be taken up by dwellings and the rest in terms of a contribution. So it was looking at that element as well. In the past, we've had issues in respect of drainage and flood risk brought up in respect of these applications. And I think in terms of technical details, it's just to have a fuller understanding of that. I feel uncomfortable with Councillor Fellows' question not being fully answered in respect of whether there's a pond that has been removed or not. And if that's not addressed and the drainage issues are not addressed, I feel uncomfortable making a decision today.
Can I address you on the issue of the affordable housing? The affordable housing was part of the original outline consent, and it was set as part of the obligation of that, and there was no escalator clause put on that agreement. So Councillor Rimmer, I'm very sorry, and I am very sorry that we can't address that 5% affordable housing contribution, which I think is probably not acceptable, but we can't go back, and that was made a decision of the council at the time it was made. So as far as I'm concerned, that's it. In terms of the shared surfaces, the position with the shared services is the fact that we've had no objection from highways on that point. So therefore, the shared services will go ahead. And I mean, as it's set out in the layout comments at page 37, the shared services allows for natural traffic calming around development by placing pedestrians at the high priority and encourages social interaction on street spaces and associated benefits. So so basically, in terms of that point, we've not had any issues raised with the Highway Authority. So there is no danger to there's no highway danger issues. The point you made on the ponds, obviously the ecological surveys would have been done by the developer, and if there was any issues of ponds, they would have been picked up. I have asked Thomas to quickly check on that point. Quick message to him while you were talking. So as far as that, if there would have been any ecology issues with the ponds, they would have been, and if there had been any ponds, they'd have been picked up, and we'd have sought for them either to be relocated or the development to be created around that. And actually, if there had been any ponds, we'd have had issues of flooding in those areas, so we'd have had to have some additional sud work. So in that case, Mr. Councillor Rimmer, I think that we are safe to say that any ponds that were in there would not have been natural natural ponds if there had been any, and if there had been any, we'd have had issues with either ecology or actually flooding around them. So they would have been dealt with during this process. So as far as I'm concerned, I think I've answered those 3 questions for you.
Councillor
Thank
Rimmer, do you
you.
have any further questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And thank you for those answers, Ms. Lyons. I was also interested to know, in terms of possible further condition, and this is something I'm mindful of that we haven't been looking at with developments generally, when we've been looking at landscaping in particular. The council adopted, thanks to my ward colleague, Councillor Mackenzie, a pollinator policy, and in terms of encouraging different types of wildflowers that are blossoming at different seasons, and actually encouraging sort of bee life and pollinator life generally. Is that something that we could actually have as a condition in terms of landscaping, but some element of pollinator policy is actually adopted?
I think we can do that. I will have a quick chat with Charles Sweeney and the planning officer, and I will get back to you before we finish this session on this application. Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Rimmer, any further questions for clarification?
Oh no, that's fine for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Schrader.
I have nothing at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Parish Councillor McPherson Davis.
Nothing at this time, Chairman.
Thank you. We will now go out of session to listen to members of the public. So the first member of the public to address the committee is Andrea Purser. For all members of the public that are listening, if you're listening along to YouTube as well as joining the Zoom meeting, if you could set YouTube to mute so that we can just hear you on the recording of the Zoom meeting. So if you're listening on YouTube alongside, please set yourself to mute. Sorry, Kemi.
Sorry, it was Heather Wickers. That was the first speaker.
Sorry, Heather Wickers. Sorry.
Yeah.
And there are 2 members of the public, in addition to a ward councillor, to address the committee on this item.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you'll have 3 minutes to address the committee, and that will start from now.
Okay, with regards to Mrs. Lyons' comment with regards to the total amount of housing covers the outline consent given years ago, there still is a further planning application that was taken away only a few weeks ago. So then you need to take into regard that actually there will then be further houses than the outline consent. I'm sure Ms. Lyons will clarify that. So with that still outstanding, that may be why the total number is going to go a lot more. If we look at Fletcher's, there's going to be a pathway put between the 2 end houses of Fletcher's into the new estate. There's a lot of issues with this. The residents have spent a lot of time making it a no cold cooler zone, so that basically because we was suffering with crime in the area, but that path is going to connect to a basically to a pumping station and a car park, which could then basically just be another area for crime to get back into our area. There actually is no need for the footpath because there's enough places where residents within Lee Chapel South and the new development can move around and go between the 2 different areas. The land is higher on Red Rose site to the current residents. There is a massive surface water risk, as Councillor Rimmer has said. We were completely ignored as residents. With regards to this, we have flooding in our gardens on a constant basis. So Red Row have stated that basically with the new housing going in, that will deal with all of that, but we've not seen anything to prove that. With the postage stamp gardens, going straight up to our boundaries, we're basically going to have the properties sitting on our back gardens. There's been no hedgerow buffer zone been put at the rear of Fletcher's. So again, really sort of sitting in into our resident space. And also Redrow have done no boundary measurements before submitting this application to you. So in regards, it looks like the gardens are butting straight up to the gardens, but actually if they'd done the boundary measurements, you would actually have a clearer picture on your planning application. I've run out of time.
Thank you, Ms Vickers. We'll now invite Andrea Purser to address the committee.
Apologies, that wasn't Heather Vickers, that was Andrea Purser.
Sorry, apologies.
That's okay.
Sorry. Heather, if you would now like to address the committee, you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Chair and members. My name's Heather Vickers. I am the agent for this application and a chartered town planner. Outline planning permission was granted by the council in December 2013 for this major mixed-use development in Nethermain. The development, known as Westley Green, is now well underway, with phases 1, 3A and 3B either completed or currently under construction. A vibrant new community is beginning to form on the site, with over 100 new homes now occupied by residents. With many aspects of the scheme, such as the access and the landscaping strategy agreed at the outline stage, the Reserved Matters application before you tonight seeks to agree matters of detail relating to phase 2. This is the largest phase of the Westley Green development and incorporates plentiful open spaces and play areas, a local retail centre, significant and attractive landscaping along the green spine and beyond, as well as a policy compliant level of parking. Importantly, the phase delivers 315 much needed new homes for Basildon of 1, 2, 3 and 4 bedrooms, alongside the 35% affordable dwellings in line with the outline planning permission. The scheme, as with other phases already approved, is landscape-led and designed to complement the neighbouring pattern of development to the south and to the north. Some of the existing trees and hedges will be managed and enhanced, and there will be retention of existing trees and hedges at the boundaries of the site wherever possible. While 70 trees are removed to facilitate the development, over 200 new trees will be planted across the site, a larger proportion of which will be mature and semi-mature. As noted by our officers, this makes a positive contribution to the climate resilience and biodiversity, together with a long-term amenity value to the built environment. Phase 2 not only creates new homes, but it paves the way for vital infrastructure. To the south of the expansive open space, local retail space will serve the development. Existing residents living near the site will be able to access large areas of public open space and new facilities via the proposed pedestrian links to the north. In addition, financial contributions secured as part of the development will result in investment towards health, highways and education. In addition to new homes, public open space, high quality children's play areas, wildlife reserves, our plans unlock regeneration opportunities further afield. The creation of new homes is linked to the development of a state-of-the-art new campus for the college in the town centre, as well as a new home for the market traders. Further, land has been gifted to St Luke's Hospice for expansion, and this was approved earlier this year.
I've got 30 seconds.
Our Reserved Matters application has been, the new inpatient unit and the main entrance and additional bed spaces at the hospice were granted consent earlier this year. Finally, the site will continue to create and sustain employment opportunities for the next few years. Our application has been prepared and submitted following lengthy pre-apply discussions with your officers. We're grateful for the guidance we've received throughout the process, and we hope you'll feel able to support your officer's recommendation tonight and approve the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather Vickers, for addressing us tonight. We now have Councillor Smith to address the committee, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Best declare everything. Everyone knows my opposition to the building on Dry Street, so put that there, save the monitoring officer. I'm here for 2 points tonight that the planning committee can deal with to secure my constituents. South of Fletcher's, they wish to put a sewage pumping station right on top of existing houses and their own new properties. I mean, when weather's nice, who wants to smell that? I think Redrow need to be responsible builders. Yes, they need a new sewage pumping station because of the topography of the land, but they need to be responsible. And I asked the planning committee to put a condition on to relocate this sewage pumping station. It's not fair on the people of Westley Green, and let alone the people of Lee Chapel South. The other reason I'm here tonight is this imposition of a cut through between the two estates of Lee Chapel South and Westley Green through Fletcher's. Anyone who knows Fletcher's, they're very expensive houses. It's a quiet cul-de-sac. As Mrs. Purser said a moment earlier, they've had problems with crime, they've dealt with no cold cooling zone, and it works. A really nice street to live. Even David Amos once lived there when he was our MP. Now, we keep hearing that in the outlining planning application 2013, this cut through was agreed. Now, I found an email tonight that was emailed to me on the 8th of December 2017 from one of our planning staff, Katie Ellis. And she writes, "Dear Councillor Smith, I'm able to provide an answer at this time as I'm awaiting for phase 3B of the Nevermain development, Wesley Green, which will about the boundary of Fletcher's. Once this application has been received by the council, I will be able to confirm to some form of connection." So this business about a 2013 outlining plan application connection between Fletcher's and Wesley Green never existed. It's there in that email from Katie Ellis of the 8th of December 2018. So I asked the planning committee, don't let them destroy and wreck Fletcher's. It's a great estate, Wesley Green. Let them have their own estate. Let the people of Chapel South have their own estate. There is no need for this cut through. It will only create antisocial behaviour. And also, please put a condition on to have this sewage plant put in a more suitable place within the Wesley Green development, well away from anyone's houses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
I'll unmute myself. Thank you, Councillor Smith. Just before we go into the main deliberations on the item, before I ask any members if they wish to address the committee, just wish to invite either Ms. Lyons, Mr. Sweeney, or Mr. Benson just to address any of the points that were raised during the technical clarification session, and if there's any points that came up there that they wish to address us on.
Charles or Thomas, can we address the point with regard to the sewage treatment works and where that sits in terms of this consent or the previous consent that was granted at outline?
Yes, if I can just pull the presentation back up. So, Thomas, can you just talk us through where the pumping station's proposed to go, please?
So the pumping station is where your cursor is, just a little bit further north. Yeah, it's just there. Yeah, so it's just to the south of Fletcher's. It's been advised that it will be built to adoptable standards and will be adopted by Anglian Water. And it's got a 15 metre distance between any properties. It's not going to be operational all the time. It will only be operational when it's needed. Its 15 metre distance from any properties is there to reduce any noise impact levels on any properties existing or those to be developed. I also contacted EHO, who confirmed they were satisfied the noise impacts wouldn't be significant.
Can you please let Councillor Smith know about any smell? Obviously, there was odour concerns raised by Councillor Smith. What was the response to that with regards to odour? Obviously, that's one of the things that was raised by Councillor Smith.
Yes, so in terms of smells, that's also why the 15 metre distance is there. It's been built to adoptable standards so that it's got sufficient distance between existing properties and any new properties that'll be there. As I say, also that it's only going to be operational whilst it's needed, so it won't be constantly operational throughout the day or the night. It will only be operational once it's needed to be in use.
Could we, can we suggest that we look at two conditions, having discussed, I know condition levels yet, but we looked at condition with regards to the pollinators that was requested by Councillor Rimmer, and can we look at a condition that would increase the landscape along that boundary of Fletcher's with that, to look at how we can actually seek to improve the outlook, and also it might create an increased buffer between that edge of Fletcher's and this the site, even though you've got 15 metres, because that is obviously an area of no development, what we can do to improve that area? Can we put additional condition that would deal with that?
I can try and put a condition on regarding that for both of those points.
Yeah, I think certainly we can add those conditions on. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons, Mr. Benson, Mr. Sweeney. We'll now go into the main deliberations. And Councillor Turner, do you wish to address the committee?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And can I just have one point of clarification? And the resident said about the size of the gardens. Can I just double check that they are standard gardens? We're not compromising our guidelines for those back gardens that border onto Fletcher, are we?
Mr. Benson, do you wish to respond there?
So with regards to garden sizes, there are some properties which fall below standard, but the shortfall is considered minor. So it is a difference between around 3 and 11 meters squared, which is the shortfall. But the majority of the houses are built to adoptable standards, or not adoptable standards, to the standards of garden sizes.
Okay, and why do we think that is okay? Just because we do?
I think the issue, Councillor Turner, is the fact that we've got gardens that meet the standards that we would set in terms of national space standards now, in terms of what's required through modern development, and the gardens meet that criteria. I think that the guidelines set out that we've got as our DC guidelines, we've also adopted the Essex Design Guide, which actually has a lesser standard than ours. So we actually have 2 adopted documents at the moment that deals with garden sizes. I think the issue that you want to know, Councillor Turner, is the fact that do the gardens that abut the boundary of Fletcher's, are they to standard? I think that's the question that can you answer that question, Thomas? So if they the development, the properties that abut Fletcher's, are they compliant with the space standards, and also back-to-back distances, which is more important, I think, than the garden distance? So do we comply back-to-back and side-to-back in terms of our policy on those issues as well?
So all of the properties, sorry, let me just get. So all of the properties to the west side of Fletcher's have all adequate garden sizes, and they meet the criteria. Regards to back-to-back distances, the properties in Fletcher's do benefit from very large garden sizes, and so the back-to-back distances are suitable as well.
Okay, and sorry, Chairman, if you'd indulge, can I just ask what is the relevance of the footpath into Fletcher's? Is it because it provides access somewhere to something? Because that is quite that cul-de-sac's quite out of the way for a lot of the amenities. I know Castle Main shops are down there and there's a school. Are we thinking that it's a cut through to access those facilities? Oh, and a doctor's, of course.
So with regards to the cut through, so this is to allow existing residents access to the new school that will be built in this development. It also gives them access to the new open spaces that will be created around this area as well. And it also provides a cut through which will give them access to a quicker route to the doctors as well.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Fellows.
Sorry, Chairman. No, I don't have any major clarification or points to raise, although I was interested in what Councillor Turner said about the back-to-back, but that seems to have been dealt with by the officers. It's, we all know that the way that, because it's been given consent 7 years ago, we're going to have great difficulty in rejecting this application, sadly, or not, depending on which your viewpoint is. But one thing I would say, with my experience of working with the residents, because this is my constituency, perhaps I should have said that at the beginning, and representatives from Redrow are not good neighbours during this building phase. I know you can't, what's the old saying? You can't scramble eggs without breaking eggshells. But on behalf of the residents, I'm consistently contacting Redrow with regards to disturbances, dogs barking, security dogs, massive amounts of dust impacting my residents' lives. And I would really like to have tighter restrictions or conditions put on this application, so that Redrow really do have to be the good neighbour that we want them to be, and that my residents deserve them to be. That's one thing I would like to point out before we close this item, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fellows. Ms. Lyons, Mr. Sweeney, Mr. Benson, do you wish to address the point on the conditions around building work and the conditions that are upon the applicant for that?
I mean, I can deal with that. I mean, we can. I think we should ask. I think we should ask them that they sign up to the Considerate Constructors scheme, and I think we can use that. We can put that as a condition that they sign up to that. The imposition of conditions relating to construction are generally more difficult for us to implement, to control, and I've always been a little bit. And it's been deemed through case law that they're not easy to control. The best way to control them is that they sign up to the Considerate Constructors scheme, which is a scheme which they have to sign up to, and they have to make it very clear that they've signed up to it, and it provides contact details for residents of how they get back to the constructors when there's problems straight away, a 24-hour line, which is the best way. So can we put additional condition that they sign up to the Considerate Constructors scheme, Charles?
Yes, I think we can do that, yes.
Councillor Fellows, do you wish to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that, Mrs. Lyons. That's heartening. But I'd like to put a further one in, is that the security hut, could that not be moved back to the extremity of their site on the boundary? Because what happens is, Redrow may lay down the laws to their delivery drivers and so on, but I've had recent instances where we've had skip lorry drivers, large lorries, coming into the compound and waiting outside the security gate as early as 7:15, when everyone knows they shouldn't be starting work on that site until 8 o'clock in the morning. And I'd like to see that hut put out into the boundary, so they can't actually get onto the compound before 8 o'clock.
Okay, can we put additional condition on the permission that requires them to submit details to us before they put a new their new site works compound on the site, Charles, as well?
Yes, we can do that.
So far we've agreed to Councillor Rimmer's pollinator, we've agreed to a landscaping scheme around the sewage, so we don't forget this, around the sewage. We've agreed to a condition about them signing up to Considerate Constructors scheme, and also a condition that they will submit to us for the details of the new location of the site hut and the works compound to be agreed in writing prior to commencement on site. So far. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. Councillor Kettle.
Just don't forget them.
Right, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, Councillor Kettle.
Okay, yeah, it's about the Fletchers and the proposed footpath leading through it, and the sewage pumping station. Now, I've been listening to a lot of comments, and I've seen feedback from the residents, especially Andrea, and I don't think it's a good idea to put the pathway through Fletchers and maybe move the pumping station, because although you say the smell from the sewage pumping station, but they don't take into account the wind changes in the atmosphere, which pollution, which cause dust, and then you've got a lot of people there with respiratory problems as well. And the crime rate as well, which I'm very much concerned about, because if you've got that walkway and the pumping station and a car park, how are you going to stop the crime from increasing, which is happening in Basildon? I mean, can look into this? Because it's quiet down there and it's a dead end and it's just privacy, and they're just going to lose all that privacy.
Thank you, Councillor Kessel. I'll ask the officers to come back at the end of this deliberation and address that point directly, if that's okay. Councillor Reid.
Fine.
I couldn't hear you there, Councillor Reid, but I'm assuming that there was no points to raise. Thank you. Councillor Schrader.
You can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs. I think that was the idiom that Councillor Fellows was groping for. I don't really have much to observe on this application, other than I said to Councillor Turner earlier, it's been a couple of years since I've been on planning. I spent 4 years on this committee, and it felt like putting the band back together, except that all the personnel has changed. But all the applications seem to be the same. Unfortunately, this is the nature of reserved matters applications, because all the principles of development were conceded 7 years ago, which was before I was even on this committee. There's not a lot you can do with them, but I think you've actually got some good conditions being added in there. I think the officers have dealt with most of the queries that have come up within the limitations of a reserve matters applications. I think you've improved this one, so I at this point am quite content. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Schrader. Councillor Rimmer.
Yes, I like the conditions, and I think we obviously are restricted by the fact that permission has already been given in terms of outline planning permission, and that's how we're looking at this. So that's fine. I still need some more clarification though on this sewage pumping in terms of the noise levels. It has been mentioned that it's acceptable. It's been mentioned that it's 15 metres away. But obviously the test that we always use is in respect of residents and whether the window is closed or whether it's open, and the sort of decibel levels and the European standard on what is acceptable. And I just want to have an understanding of that, because it's our job to kick the tires on this, regardless of where we're leaning in terms of an application. So I really need that clarified for myself, please.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer. Do you have any other points that you wish clarification, or is that the only one?
That is the major one that's come out of this discussion. My fellow councillors have raised a lot of the points. I'm really happy that the pollinator policy is going to be enacted with this development and a condition made on that. And I like the fact that they are trying to mitigate in terms of the sewage pumping by having some landscaping to do that. And I think I'm generally happy. It's just this noise level, because we have to think about residents are already there and future residents.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer. Ms. Lyons.
The issue of the footpath, Charles has just got back to me, that was actually shown on the original outline consent, so it's not actually part of this planning mission. It was something that was outlined in the original permit, in the origins of the application. So it's not something that's just arrived as part of the reserve matters application. In terms of the sewage, we've had no objections from environmental health on this point. What we could look at is a condition that would set ambient levels of noise, which we could agree with the chair and members that we get to a certain level that it can't exceed a certain ambient noise. That we do that. It's very intermittent noise, and it's set about it would be set behind the ambient noise within the local environment. But we can get that agreed with environmental health, and we can get that through to you within as normal before we get to agree as a committee. Because I mean, we haven't had an objection from the environmental health team, and the environmental health team are here actually very good. So if there had been an issue of noise or smell, they would have no doubt annihilated us with a condition or anything to put on this. So we'd have had some good conditions attached to it. There hasn't been any, but I can request that we look at a certain level, noise level that can't be exceeded, which then I think would meet your issue, Councillor Rimmer, and also the issues raised by Councillor Kettle and what other councillors, and also Councillor Smith as well. So we can look at a condition that will deal with that point.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. Could you just confirm whether that would need to come back to the committee, or whether that to be agreed between?
No, we can agree
myself?
that between myself and yourself. Just through.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Parish Councillor McPherson Davis.
No comments, Chairman.
Councillor Schrader, are you wishing to come back in on this point?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I was only going to say on that point of the noise issue. I mean, I've been out of it far too long, but I do vaguely remember during one particular application, I think it was the motocross thing, where they were talking about the issue of noise and whether there's anything you could look at through landscaping and so forth that would ameliorate any potential noise problems, screening and so forth. That was, I do very vaguely remember there was like a scheme that a noise expert suggested that would help to mitigate any noise issues.
One of the conditions we've already spoken about will actually look at some additional landscaping, because that's obviously you've got that 15-metre buffer. We can look at that. But I think the point that Councillor Rimmers make, I think it's actually quite a valid point. The fact that what we want is to make sure that as this thing gets older, it doesn't, the noise doesn't get, because obviously as machinery gets older, and it's like lighting, lighting gets older and older, it becomes ineffective, but it spreads the light further. So what I suggest we do is we look at a condition that would actually just set a maximum noise level.
Councillor Kettle, did you have any, now that your point has been addressed by the planning officers, do you have any further questions that you wish to ask?
No.
Are there any other members that wish to address the committee on this item? Councillor Turner.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Chairman, as always, it's not so much the development. I mean, that development's caused some problems when they're going in, and yet breaking eggs and making an omelette is a good analogy. But I am mindful of the fact that Fletchers, through no fault of their own, are going to have to put up with this development probably for the next 2 or 3 years. I can't vote for this in its current form. I think the issues that have been raised, I think we deserve, as Councillor Rimmer said, kick the tyres. And I think there's too many here. And okay, the pathways on the original application, so we can't do anything about that. But I'm a little bit concerned that, again, Fletchers are going to live with an amount of traffic that they've not seen before. They've got gardens backing onto them with, I don't know, mitigation in terms of screening through the use of trees or bushes. It doesn't sound like that's going to be possible unless the residents want to put it in themselves. But the clincher for me is this pumping station. Here's Fletchers, living to all intents and purposes in a rural community. And now suddenly, guess what? We're not only going to dump 300 houses on them. Incidentally, no disrespect to Red Road, the houses up there are superb. But the pumping station, that's another matter. And I think I would rather deal with it than leave it to chance and have the settled community there be blighted by a pump, however well intended it's done. Because once it's there, that's it. It's there. You're never going to move it, not in a million years. So unfortunately, I can't vote for these reserved matters, and hope you'll forgive me.
Councillor Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to what Mrs. Lyons said about noise levels, we all know what sewage pump does for it. I mean, what would happen? You get up to a certain threshold of decibels, and then it's exceeded, and then the pumping station cuts out, so there's no more noise. And then what happens to the effluent? I take Councillor Turner's objection is that there are too many unknowns at this moment in time. But perhaps Mrs. Lyons could, or one of the officers could answer what would happen if the pumping station did exceed a certain number of decimals, please.
I think the issue is, it's not, the point is the fact that we've had no objection for environmental health with regards to noise from this or any smells from the pumping station. They haven't asked us to put a condition on, which they did do with the plant and machinery that's going in place for the retail units. So really, as far as we're concerned, we could ask, what we're saying is the fact that once installed, it will not reach that certain level. If it reached that certain level, then they would have to do some additional works. But from what they've told us so far, it doesn't require that. So in those terms, I don't think there's anything that more than we can say. The other option we've got is that if you're not happy with a condition looking at the maximum noise levels, is we put a, where you've got condition 7 that deals with plant and machinery, is that we add into we add it as part of that condition that says that, or we look at condition very similar to that, that looks at the mechanisms of the sewage works to ensure they don't reach certain ambient noise or certain odor smells. But I'm a bit at odds with this, because if this had been raised as an issue, we would have had an objection from the environmental health team, which we haven't had. So really, under the imposition of conditions, I haven't got an objection from the statutory sort of consultee to deal with that. So it is quite difficult from us from a planning perspective, because if we'd had an objection from environmental health, we'd be in a lot stronger position, but we haven't had that objection. So it is, for me, it's quite difficult that they haven't raised an objection to this. So from their perspective, it's not going to be a nuisance maker. So therefore we've got very little. In planning terms, we've got to be very careful about just putting conditions on that are unreasonable. And so I get Councillor Turner's position as well, is the fact that I think the maximum we can put on here would be a condition relating to a additional landscape buffer, and then one relating to a maximum noise levels. Anything further, I think, would go into grounds of unreasonableness. And as we haven't had an objection from the statutory consultee on that matter, I think we'll be heading towards issues of unreasonableness.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. Mr. Benson, do you wish to come back in?
Yes, I just wanted to add a bit more regarding the noise levels. So information sent over from the agent was that typical noise levels are likely to be 14 to 15 decibels. Which is around leaves rustling gently in the wind. And this is due to the pumps being submerged in water when they are in operation. There's also comments to say that there are sensors within the wet well, and when water builds up to a certain level, the pump works. When water builds up to a certain level on the pump works, until the water drops below the sensors, and then the pump stops.
So sorry, Thomas, what was the response from environmental health? In the response, it says we had no. So in the response you wrote in the report, it says that objections were received from residents, and then you go down to ward councillors, and it's Councillor Smith's issue. You say the pumping station is located where ground level occurs within the development. The pumping station is located at least 50 metres from any habitable dwelling, which is in accordance with the advice given by the sewers for adoption 6th edition. The environmental health team have no objection to the location of the proposed pumping station. Did they send anything else in their consultation response?
They didn't send any more, but I went back to them specifically regarding the pumping station and sent over the noise levels that the agent had provided, and they had said they were happy with those noise levels and they had no objections to that.
So therefore we've gone to the statutory consultee on this matter, and there is no issues with regard to the noise created from that. So we have got no grounds to look at anything stronger than a condition that would put a maximum noise levels of what they've quoted in their planning permission and their planning submissions.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. From me, I've listened to the comments tonight from all members, from ward members, from members of the public, and the agent. And I actually think we've had a really good discussion on this as a committee tonight, that we've been able to listen to one another and put in conditions where we feel they're needed to for the pollinator, for increasing the landscape buffer, and doing as much as we possibly can to create that sense of security around the noise level from the pumping station, and monitoring that going forward. We're, as Councillor Schrader said, we're limited within the realms of of this type of application and being reserved matters, that we can't do any more than that. And I think we've as a committee done a good job tonight discussing this application, and putting in the conditions that we think are necessary to develop this application further. So we now proceed to vote on the recommendation on page 28, the planning application number 20/00077/REM be granted planning permission, subject to the conditions set out at the end of the report on page 41 to 45, with the additional conditions around the pollinator, increasing the landscape buffer size, signing up to the considerate construction scheme, and ambient noise levels to be agreed with myself. So I'll now ask each member individually which way they intend to vote. Councillor Schrader.
In favour.
Thank you. Councillor River.
In favour.
Councillor Turner.
I'll be voting against. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Fellows.
Sadly, no.
Sorry, Councillor Fellows, I wasn't able to register that. And you're on mute.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Reluctantly, I have to vote in favour because I don't want to cost the council with appeals.
Thank you. Councillor Kettle.
I vote against.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Favour.
Thank you. And I will also be voting in favour. So with 5 votes in favour and 2 against, that has carried. Could I just have a steer from members of whether they would want 5 minutes between now and the next application, or whether they want to carry on? We'll take a 5-minute break between now and the next application. So we'll come back in at 11 minutes past. Okay, do we have all members back? If you could turn your camera on so that I can see that everyone is back in the room.
Yeah, I'm back.
Thanks, Councillor Kessel. Just waiting for Councillor Schrader, I believe. And Councillor Fellows.
Hi, I'm here.
So just wait for Councillor Fellows. We'll give him another minute. And he is back. I can see you, Councillor Fellows. So we now go forward with agenda item number 5, which is 2 applications: planning application number 20/00282/full and 20/00293/full at 2 Guernsey Gardens in Wickford. While we will hear the planning item together, we will vote separately on the recommendations when we come to the vote. And I'll hand over to Mr. Spears.
Ah, there he is. Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you very much. Sorry, as soon as the presentation came up on the screen, my unmute button disappeared underneath it, which wasn't very helpful there. So I was having to guess where it was, but apologies for that. Okay, well, this site, if you could go on to the next slide, please, Charles. The site is one that may be familiar to some members, 2 Guernsey Garden in Wickford. It's a large residential plot just to the north of the town centre of Wickford at the junction of Guernsey Gardens and Station Avenue. If you could go on to the next one, please, Charles. It has been the subject of 2 fairly recent planning applications, which were both determined by the Planning Committee in 2018 and 2020. First of which was for the redevelopment of the site for 12 apartments and a chalet towards the rear, and the second one for 10 apartments and a chalet towards the rear. The first of those was also the subject of an appeal following the refusal of planning permission by the committee. First, both applications were refused planning permission at the Planning Committee. The main grounds for refusal were that the apartment block represented a bulky scale of development, and its massing was out of character and detrimental to the street scene. I think there's less of a problem in relation to the chalet at the rear of the site. The current proposals are a sort of a fairly significantly scaled down version for the same chalet at the rear of the site, but for the front of the site to now comprise 2 semi-detached and 1 detached 4-bedroom house. Now, I'll just refresh your memory with a few photographs of the site. That's existing property, which is quite a large 2-storey detached, I suppose, sort of Tudor-Beathan style property, mid-20th century, I suppose, maybe 30s. If you go on to the next one, please, Charles. And this just shows the relationship of the site to the adjacent property at 4 Guernsey Gardens, which is a bungalow. And the next one on should show the relationship on the other side to 36 Station Avenue, which is sort of a bungalow conversion with big dormers. But I think as you can see further down the road here in the wider street scene, you've got more of a mix. You have got 2-storey houses, not just bungalows and chalets. So there is a mix of property styles in the area. And if you could move on to the final photograph, please, Charles. This is just a quick view at the rear of the site. So this is the area roughly where the chalet is proposed to be at the eastern end of the site, which backs onto properties in Jersey Gardens. If you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, well, there's 2 applications here, but I've sort of put them together in one report because they're really sort of form the same sort of development in total. The first one is in relation to just the chalet at the rear of the site. It's the same siting, same design as that which was considered previously by members. And I think, I'm sure you'll tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's fair to say that there weren't really any major objections to this. The rear garden depth is a little short at just over 9 metres, but the gardens of the properties in Jersey Gardens are extensive, so it still maintained a good back-to-back distance between the properties. There's also a garage, double garage with 2 parking spaces, and the access comes down the sort of side of the site, same way as it did originally, with turning on the site for traffic to enter and exit in forward gear. Next slide, please, Charles. There's the design of it again. I think it's identical to that which was previously proposed. Chalet is 7.6 at its highest point. Obviously, the first floor accommodation is sort of entirely within the roof space, which keeps the scale of the building down. Very traditional design and material finishes proposed, and we feel that in the context of the site, this is an acceptable development. And if we now move on to the second related application, now this also includes the chalet at the rear of the site. That's identical to that previous plan you've just seen, but this application is for the whole site. So it includes the chalet plus the 3 properties to the front of the site. As you can see there, we're now talking about individual houses. So they each have their own gardens, very deep gardens, actually 25, 26 meters, I think, to the rear of them, with single garage parking plus 2 parking spaces for each unit, access directly out onto the highway, rather than being sort of accessed via the driveway. Next one, please, Charles. So we'll look quickly at the designs of the properties. This is the detached property. I suppose they've tried to pick up a little bit from the original house. It's got a slightly sort of Tudor beam detailing above the gables, fully hipped roof. So it's 4 bedrooms, all main windows, front and rear, and a height of about 8.7 meters, which is probably not it's sort of a reasonable height for a 2-story house of this style. Moving on again, please. And these are the semi-detached properties, obviously shown separated here for appearance purposes, but they are joined in the middle, and you'll see that in the street scene in a moment. Again, picking up a little bit on some of the sort of Tudor detailing on one side, and as you can see there, the integral garage underneath the 4th bedroom. These are just a little bit lower in height at 8.6 meters, and obviously you've got this central section which drops down even lower. I think that's about 6.3 meters in height. And if I could have the next slide, please, Charles. Okay, this one is a street scene comparison. So obviously you've got the previous scheme for the 10 apartments, and then you've got the scheme below for the 2 semi-detached and 1 detached house. The apartments had a height of about 9 meters. The original apartment scheme, which you can see dotted there on the top street scene, was 9.3. So they've reduced it a little bit between scheme 1 and 2. Current scheme obviously is a little bit lower again at 8.6, 8.7 to Ridge, but obviously the main difference being that obviously because you're talking about a detached, 2 semi-detached properties with reduced roof lines and gaps between properties, again their scale is reduced further. You've also obviously, as you look at the lower drawing, a lot of the mass in that, which is sometimes difficult to tell from a plan, which you almost need a sort of 3D image to get it from, obviously is roof running away from the road as opposed to full 2-story walls. If I can go on to the next one, please, Charles. Okay, this is a comparison of the site layouts now. Obviously, the top one there you can see with the frontage for the apartments. Obviously, that had a wider access road next to number 4, and then obviously with parking to the rear of that, and then obviously the chalet beyond that, which hasn't changed. Obviously, the proposals now are to bring the accesses directly out at the front, which creates a bigger sort of green space behind, and more of the land effectively being retained as private garden area. And onto the final one, please, Charles. So, having reviewed the proposals, officers consider that development proposals for the site now represent a satisfactory form of development. The scale has been reduced significantly, and in the context of the site and surrounding area, both applications are considered acceptable, and it's recommended that planning permission is granted, subject to the conditions as set out at pages 57 and 58 of your agenda. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Spears. We're now going to technical questions for clarification. Councillor Fellows.
Nothing from me, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Fellows. Councillor Rimmer. Councillor Rimmer, are you there?
Sorry, I had slight audio problems for a moment. I've just had to check those and reset, so apologies there. You were asking if I had any questions, I'm guessing. Yes. It's actually to do with it's going back to the actual volume of the new properties that have been proposed as opposed to the flats, the 2 semi-detached and the detached house, and to see how that compares. I know we had I know we had a situation where we could see the outline between the first application that got refused and the second application that got refused, and then we had the diagram underneath. But I still find it quite difficult to actually ascertain from that the sort of difference in the street scene in terms of bulk, because obviously our objection was in terms of bulk, and I'm just wanting to make sure we're being reasonable and for both sides, for the developer and for the residents that already exist there in terms of the street scene. So it's an understanding of that, please.
Okay, yeah. Yes, it's always it's one of these ones where it'd been quite nice if the developer had perhaps provided more of a 3D model to show, so you can sort of get a more angled view of it. Yeah, it's always difficult when you look at these plain ones. I think one of the things I would say as you look at those two street scene elevations is obviously the gaps between the properties and the shapes of the roofs, but also the amount of roof to wall. Obviously walls at 90 degrees to ground, they're going straight up. They have a much more bulky impact than a roof, which is running away from it. I mean, the way you look at those roofs on those houses that are now proposed, you wouldn't really ever see them like that, because obviously you'd be seeing depth. So the top of those roofs would be set back, whereas obviously the 2-story walls are straight in front of you. So I think that's one of the major things I would probably pick out from those drawings. If we could perhaps just go to the comparison layout. Yeah, is that the one before that? I'll go back the other way, I think, Charles. Sorry.
Sorry, has somebody got the radio on in the background? If so, could you just turn yourself to mute while we're deliberating this item?
Yeah, I think this is probably fairly good image, because obviously you can see there on the what probably makes the other building bulky, and I think was what really concerned members. You've obviously got this area of flat roof, so it's quite a deep plan block. It's very sort of rectangular, and obviously to keep the overall height down, obviously they've almost had to cut the top off and add these sort of the flat roof in there, which can work in some cases, but I know members did have concerns about that. Obviously the proposal now doesn't include any flat roof, and I think it tries to break the roof line up. You've got it's deeper in parts as you look at those dwellings, but obviously there are sort of gables running forward and back from the main ridge, so the overall sort of scale of the buildings would be quite significantly less. I mean, if we take the detached building at the bottom of the screen there, obviously it has got quite a long wall to its sort of northern boundary, but obviously that's a gable running through, and then as the main wall runs the other way, it's got a sort of more of a chalet form to the front, and obviously only goes back as a single story element on the back of the site. So I think probably that area, that view of the sort of the site layout probably shows how much more broken up the buildings are on the site. I hope that helps to answer your question.
And yeah, sort of, I guess. So I mean, just in terms of percentage decrease, in terms of volume, in terms of bulk, what are we talking about here?
I don't think I could probably give you a figure on the volumes of it. I think it's really a judgment on how they appear. I mean, I think houses do appear less bulky probably than a block of flats does anyway. I mean, I think it's just the way you read the building. I mean, I think the big change is probably you've got more roof and less walls. So I suppose if you look at it that way, you've got a bigger triangle and less of a sort of a cube underneath it. So I suppose the volume comes down because it's more roof and less actual wall, so less full 2-story height.
And just sorry, Chair, and thank you for indulging me on this. It's also looking at the parking spaces. It does seem that we've got more green space and less parking spaces as well. And I'm guessing we're keeping to our normal conditions in terms of how many parking spaces we should have in terms of units. Is that because we've moved from flats to houses as well? And this is obviously an extra beneficial factor to have more green space, is that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was directly a reason for refusal of certainly the second application. I think possibly the earlier one, there was a concern about the level of parking proposed being too low. But no, I mean, I think it probably, you could argue that it means that the development is perhaps more in keeping with surrounding development. You've got, you know, houses with gardens as opposed to flats with parking, so you've got more green space. I suppose that is beneficial from a suds drainage point of view, even if you want to look at it from that point of view, retaining more green space within the site. Obviously there is a downside, because obviously it does mean to provide the parking for each individual house at the front means there's slightly less green space at the front, and there'll have to be a little bit of work done on the material finishes and some additional landscaping to replace the sort of the hedging that's on the front of the site at the present time, albeit that that's obviously not in terribly good condition.
And just finally on that landscaping, again, could we look at a pollinator condition for this development?
It's been accepted on the previous one. I see no reason why not.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer and Mr. Spears. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just talk about the bungalow at the back? The garden there, I thought, wasn't to our requirements. Has that changed at all?
No, I mean, it's slightly below the sort of the depth distance, but if we're talking a bit like we were talking earlier on the other scheme, if we're looking at the garden area for the new occupiers, then you are talking about something, I think it's about 20 metres wide, so they've got a huge space of garden for their chalet. Obviously, it's a lower style building, so it's less bulky than a two-storey building. And the properties immediately adjacent in Jersey Gardens are set, have significant gardens, so they're set quite some distance from the back of this property. So although it doesn't quite have the 10.8, which we would say it set as a sort of a general guideline, it meets the back-to-back distance. So the distance between buildings is adequate.
Okay. So on the houses, if you look at the street scene, and again, the Jersey Gardens is predominantly low-rise buildings, with the exception of maybe the one adjacent to it on the right. As you look at this, why is it we can't get 3 detached houses with lower roofs on there? Do the roofs really need to be that high?
Mr. Spears, do you wish to discuss that in relation to your the previous applications that have come forward?
Apologies, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, sorry, the screen changed on me and my little mute button disappeared yet again. So it's yeah, I'm trying to find it around the page there. Hang on, sorry, I've got various things coming up on my screen now. Excuse me. Right, that's better. Yeah, I mean, obviously we've got to consider the application that's been put in front of us. It would be wide enough, I think, to get 3 detached properties across the site if that was what the applicant wished to do. In terms of the heights of the buildings, 8.7, 8.6, I think that's probably pretty much the going rate for a detached or a semi-detached property of this sort of style. You can obviously get lower ones. Some of the ones from the sort of 60s, early 70s obviously have much shallower roofs. That was sort of more the style of that time, and those probably are, yeah, probably not much more than sort of 7.2 to 7.5 meters. But I think the height the height of these properties is sort of commensurate with their style and design to keep a fairly steep pitch to create a more attractive dwelling.
It's just that you know that road. When you look at the 2 developments as you've got them posted there, the one above it clearly is bulk and dense and all that good stuff, but it's not too far removed from the one with the application we've got in front of us. The roofs seem unusually high for the houses they get, and I accept that what you're saying is that on other developments we would accept the height that they're proposing, but in this situation where we're trying to blend it in with the settled community, it just seems extremely out of keeping. And there's no, I can't see any reason for it. And the issue I'm having is the one above it, clearly bulk and density hits you straight off. But trying to put this into perspective, albeit with a gap between the semis and a detached, I'm thinking that there's probably not a lot of difference there. Try to mitigate it by breaking up the street scene. I don't know why we haven't got 3 detached houses, particularly given the garden size. And then you add on this unusually high roof line. And again, to me, it just detracts from the street scene in terms of its bulk and its density.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Schrader, do you have any technical questions for clarification?
Oh, I'm good for now, thank you.
Councillor Reid.
No, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Kettle.
No, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Parish Councillor McPherson-Davies. Sorry, Parish Councillor McPherson-Davies, you're on mute. Sorry, you're on mute there. Okay, I'll take that as no questions for clarification. We will now go into the main deliberation as we have no members of the public wishing to address the committee on this item. Councillor Fellows?
Not from me, Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kettle?
Not from me, thank you.
Councillor Schrader?
I share some of my colleagues' concerns about the density the proposal, but certainly of the two, I can't remember when we ever looked at 2 applications at once, but certainly of the two,
Sorry, Councillor Schrader, I'm going to ask you to repeat yourself there. I don't know if that was me. Sorry, Councillor Schrader. I think we missed pretty much most of what you, or pretty much all of what you were saying there. So if you could just repeat your point.
Not sure if that's me or you guys, but can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying that I share some of the concerns about the density when you look at the surrounding properties. I'm not familiar with the planning history of this one, so I mean, it looks like it's been reduced a fair bit, but it does still look ever so big to me. Whether it's big enough to justify a refusal, I'm not convinced. But certainly of the two, I think the second is considerably preferable to the first. I think that's probably my only observation on this one. Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
No, I think the same as others have said, that it's what we've got in front of us is a lot better than what we had proposed before. Thank you.
Councillor Rimmer?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think it's a lot more sympathetic to our concerns before in terms of bulk. I was a little bit cynical when I saw it on the agenda for the 3rd time as a development, and I'm thinking, well, they're just going to keep on knocking until they get the result that they want. But actually, it does look like they've taken on board all of the concerns as much as they feel they can do, and I actually feel that actually it looks okay as far as I'm concerned, and I'm minded to just say yes to this application, to both elements, sorry, to the chalet and the semi-detached with the detached property at the front.
Thank you.
With the conditions, sorry, with the conditions about the pollinator, of course.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer. Councillor Turner.
So no surprise, I won't be voting for either of these. I think, you know, we compromised our standards. It's too easy to say it's okay. You can compromise our standards on one thing or another, and we do that all the time. And we get fed this diet of it's okay here, but it's not okay there. Clearly, you know, we've got a standard. It wasn't met, and we can say, yeah, well, the gardens behind it are long, and the building in front is small, but it doesn't meet our standards, and we erode them at our peril. For me, the street scene doesn't seem to have changed. Yeah, the developer's been very clever in breaking it up. I'm very unhappy with the roof lines on those front buildings. I don't know why they need to be that high, to be honest. I don't think they need to be. And again, in dealing with this part of the community in Wickford, where you've got a settled community that is all bungalows, I think you're adding a complication in there, and it isn't sympathetic to the street scene. So I'm probably going to be the only one that goes against it, but I still don't think it's acceptable. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Parish Councillor McPherson Davis.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Yep. My only concern is the fact that with this new planning application, no movement of the chalet to increase the garden width, depth has been made. I would have thought that would have been an offer that they could have put forward to comply with our regulations on garden lengths and sizes. So I'm unhappy with the chalet proposal.
Thank you, Parish Councillor McPherson Davis. Mr. Spears, do you wish to address any of the points raised by members in relation to the garden sizes?
I don't wish to sound pedantic, but they are guidelines and not standards. So we do have to look at each case and look at them in the sort of take an overview as to how they're impacted upon. They're also very old standards, and you know some of the sort of or guidelines. I'm saying it myself now, and they and I think we do have to look at it in a sort of more modern context. And I think you know sort of the actual impact in this case would be quite limited on surrounding residential properties. I mean, I would say that I don't recall in either of the previous two applications that the committee raised any particular issues regarding the chalet at the rear of the site, which is possibly why the developer hasn't chosen to make an amendment to it.
Thank you. This is, as Councillor Rimmer rightly said, this is the third time we've seen this application come before committee in the last 2 years. Indeed, it was both his and my first planning committee that we sat on where we first saw this application, and it is a matter of public record that I have supported this application on 2 previous occasions and will do so again tonight. And I do think the scheme has improved each time that it's come before us as well. I would just like to seek clarification from Ms. Lyons around the condition bullet point number 4 of the approval and implementation of a landscaping scheme to include both hard and soft landscaping in relation to that.
I think it's quite right, actually. Looking at the scheme in front of us, I would be concerned that we haven't got a condition that looks at hard and soft landscaping, because that frontage is going to be quite harsh if we get the wrong colour sort of finishes and walls. So I'd like to see that condition just changed to basically say approval and implementation of soft and hard landscaping. That will cover that point.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. And we'll now proceed on to the vote, subject and we'll have to take both separately. That planning application number 20/00282/4 be granted conditional planning permission, subject to the conditions on page 57 to 58, with the added element of the hard and soft landscaping and the pollinator. So, Councillor Kettle, how are you voting?
I'm going to abstain on this one, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Fellows.
I'm voting for.
Councillor Schrader.
I'm voting for.
Sorry, Councillor Schrader, could you repeat that, please? You've frozen on my screen, but if you could just repeat which way you're voting.
I'm trying the microphone. Can you hear me through this thing?
Yes.
Ah, hurrah. I'm voting in favour.
Thank you, Councillor Reid.
Favour.
Councillor Turner.
I'll be against, Chairman.
Councillor Rimmer?
In favour.
Thank you. And I will also be voting in favour. So with 5 in favour, 1 against and 1 abstention, planning application number 20/00282/4 has been passed. And we now proceed on to the second recommendation, that planning application number 20/00293/4 be granted conditional planning permission, subject to the conditions on page 57 to 58 as amended for hard and soft landscaping and the pollinator. Councillor Kettle, how are you voting?
For.
Councillor Fellows?
In favour.
Councillor Schrader?
In favour.
Councillor Reid?
In favour.
Councillor Turner?
Against.
Councillor Rimmer?
In favour.
And I will also be voting in favour. So with 6 in favour, 1 against, that has passed. We will now take a very short adjournment of 5 minutes. I've just received a request for a short adjournment for 5 minutes. So we will take that adjournment and then we will come back together. There'll be no further adjournments during the remainder of the meeting. Okay, can I ask all members to turn their cameras back on to demonstrate that we're back in the room, please? Okay, perfect. We have everybody back. Thank you. Councillor Schrader, are you here?
I'm very sorry. Yes, I am.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now proceed on to agenda item number 6, planning application number 20/00291/full at Crowndale Rolandwell Lane in Rose Bay Avenue, Billericay, which is on page 61 to 72 of your agenda. And Mr. Spears, I believe you're presenting this one again.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. If you go on to the first slide there, please, Charles. Okay, right. Well, the site lies within the Greenbelt to the north of Rose Bay Avenue, which is Queen's Park area of Billericay. It's an extensive plot of land, which I think if you look on this one, I think I'll probably go through this first. It's probably easiest now. The original dwelling, I hope you've all got equipment that shows the screen large enough. The site is edged in sort of a solid red line, and then you've got an area to the northern part of the site which has got which is dotted lines. That's the position where the original dwelling was. And it will become apparent when I go through the planning history. But then there's a subsequent history of a replacement dwelling in the dotted area to the slightly further south, under the bit that says Queen's Park, basically. So the original dwelling was further north, and then we've had various consents to rebuild it further south, closer to Rose Bay Avenue, basically on the site. So there's say north of Rose Bay Avenue, sort of immediately to the west of. Actually, I think that name's wrong. It's not Hannikins Farm Recreation Ground. I think it's Queen's Park Country Park. That area of land to the west, and there's a sort of track running up from Rose Bay Avenue that also serves as a pedestrian access to the park as well. So if I could give you a little bit of background in terms of the history of the site, planning permission was originally granted for a replacement dwelling of an original established property at the site in 2001. But around or just after this time, the existing dwelling was, which had been vacant, I understand, was badly fire damaged, and then subsequently completely demolished and removed from the site by about 2004. The consent that we granted for the replacement dwelling was renewed in 2004 and 2009 to allow time for a replacement to be built, but no action was taken within that time. And in fact, in 2012, planning permission was again granted for a replacement dwelling, but in that resited position, so the area under the bit that says Queen's Park. I think we felt at that time that by resiting it there, we actually were reducing the impact on the Greenbelt. It was more closely related to the existing urban area. This consent itself was again renewed in 2015 and effectively remained extant until August 2018, which was now some 14 years after the original dwelling had been removed from the site. So when a further application was received in 2018, officers determined that as there was no longer dwelling on the site, and they'd not been for some considerable time by that point, the proposals effectively represented development contrary to Greenbelt policy, that is, development of a vacant site, and that there were no very special circumstances which could be shown to support the proposals as an exception. Two further applications have been refused by officers for a replacement dwelling in that same position before this current application that's before you now. If you could go to the next slide, Charles, and just go through a few photos of the area. This is sort of an angled or Bing map of the site. I think you probably see where the original dwelling was, because you can still see the line there, look like cypressus trees or something there, darker green trees, which probably were the boundary of the original dwelling on the site. Obviously, the proposal later on was to build the dwelling further south, sort of probably on the edge of that open area. If you could move on to the next one, Charles. This just shows you the access in from Rose Bay Avenue, which also forms a footpath link, which goes into the country park. And the next one, and this is the 2006 aerial photograph, which is sort of the earliest one I was able to find of the site. This obviously clearly shows that by 2006, the original dwelling you can see there in the hatched or dotted line area to the northern part of the site, had been completely removed by that point, and the applicant and the agent have confirmed that it was removed by 2004. If we could move on to the final slide there, please, Charles. Okay, well, the current scheme effectively seeks to renew the earlier 2012 and 2015 consents, which are now out of time, in the revised location. But the design really is very similar to that was originally proposed going the way back to 2001. It's a two-storey house. Generally, we look for chalets and bungalows in the Greenbelt, but this was originally replacing an original two-storey property. So it was perfectly reasonable at the time to accept two-storey development. However, irrespective of the sort of merits of the design of the property, in the absence of an existing dwelling on the site that would now meet the requirements of planning policy and guidance for east placement dwellings in the Greenbelt, the proposals are considered to represent the residential development of a purely vacant site, and it's therefore considered to represent inappropriate development. Issues have been raised regarding personal and financial circumstances of the owner, but these are not considered, particularly given, I think, the length of time that has now gone since the original dwelling was removed, and the number of consents that have been granted to amount to very special circumstances clearly sufficient to outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt and as an exception to Greenbelt policy. So we're therefore recommending that planning permission in this instance is refused as set out on page 68 of the agenda. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Spears. We'll now go into technical questions for clarification. I do have a member of the public wishing to address the committee on this item, which we'll do after the technical questions for clarification. Councillor Fellows.
I don't have any technical questions, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer.
Yes, I'm just, this all is a bit worrying for me, because obviously if it was a completely open and shut case, we wouldn't be looking at this. And it's just seeing how much wriggle room we actually have in terms of these special circumstances. And I need to really understand that, because obviously this person, the owner, has lost their property through a fire. During this, we could say, oh, yeah, 16 years have passed. But we've also had a financial crisis that took place 4 years after the original application. So we don't know how this, and the person citing financial and personal situation. So I just want to understand, as councillors, as members of this committee, what sort of headspace we have to look at these exceptional circumstances. Especially as there was a dwelling there. And if you actually look at the outline there and look at the size of the property and how much it takes up, that it's not taking up much more than what was, I don't think it's taking up any more than what was there before. And it looks like a tiny speck on the landscape in the whole scheme of things. So in terms of the openness of the Greenbelt as well. So I just wanted to understand how much headspace we have, how much wriggle room we have in terms of exceptional circumstances to look at this.
Mr. Spears?
Yeah, I mean, the proposal in itself, and certainly when it was originally granted, was of a size that met our guidelines, our policies for replacement dwellings. So it's of a similar size to the property that was originally on the site. You say it's only a small dwelling on a large site, but obviously the same could be argued on numerous sites within the Greenbelt, that you could argue that where they are currently vacant. It is slightly different in that there was a dwelling on the site. We have had other examples within the borough, and I think with your agenda I did put a copy of an appeal decision in respect of one in Billericay, Breakegg Hill in Billericay, where a similar situation occurred actually, where they demolished the original dwelling, but then not implemented the new the consents. And again, there I think we granted consent on a couple of occasions to make an allowance for the fact that there may have been genuine reasons why someone couldn't actually immediately build the new property. But I suppose in the end you have to draw a line, and the longer you get from the point where the original property was lost, the less weight you can really give to any sort of circumstances. It's 14 years. That is quite some considerable time to I don't know, seek refinancing for it, or to at least make a start. I mean, planning legislation doesn't actually even require you to complete the property. You would only really have to sort of put in the foundations. That would be enough to have kept the proposals live on the site. So I think we feel that we've been quite generous with the amount of opportunity that we have given the applicant to commence work on the redevelopment of the site. And as I say, we do have to draw a line and say, well, it is clearly contrary to Greenbelt policy. The weight we can give to financial or personal circumstances has got to lessen with the time after the original event, and that in 2000, I think it was 18, we felt that had reached that point.
Ms. Lyons?
So just going to the decision that Stuart's put in the agenda is actually quite an interesting decision. It's very similar in actually context to what we've got, but also the inspector, Councillor Rimmer, the point that you've raised, the inspector deals with this point in this appeal decision, which I think goes to the point you made with regard to the various special circumstances. If you look at page 72 of your agenda and page 2 of the appeal decision, the inspector, other considerations, says, I've taken into account the effect on the appellant's personal and financial circumstances on his plans for redeveloping the site. However, it is not for the planning system to compensate for early decision to demolish existing bungalow by granting permission for a proposal which would harm the identified, which would have the harm identified above. I accept that the current proposal would be similar to that previously granted planning permission. So I think that has been dealt by the inspector in that decision, that it wasn't substantial enough to make very special circumstances at that time. And I'd say we'd probably continue with that position now.
Councillor Rimmer, do you have any further technical questions for clarification?
Yes, sorry. I mean, it's very helpful, the clarifications from the officers. It was just so the appeal decision's been mentioned. But well, there's two aspects. One, I still don't quite understand. If it's been brought to committee, obviously it's not an open and shut case for us. So I think there's some sort of judgment that we're supposed to make on this and put weight on different factors. Number two, it's this appeal decision which made by the inspectorate. It talks about demolishing a property. It doesn't talk about a fire damaging a property. So surely a demolition is of the volition of the actual of the owner, was the fire was not. So I just I see. I'm not saying there isn't any relevance between the two cases, but I also see points of difference. Is that fair to say?
Councillor Rimmer, ultimately, I think, and we'll come on to this in the main deliberation, that's a judgment for yourself to make. We have other councillors wishing to ask technical questions for clarification, so I'll hand over to Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in fairness, I asked the Chairman to bring this to committee. And again, Chairman, thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. The reason being is that when I was contacted by my constituent about developing and mentioning the words development in the Greenbelt, basically there was nothing I could do for them. We weren't going to sanction development in the Greenbelt. However, it went on to explain the circumstances that you've had before you. And if this was clearly development in the Greenbelt, then we wouldn't be talking about this tonight. I wouldn't have brought it. That would have been done by you, Chairman, and you would have signed it off refusal. But to me, this is ludicrous. It really is ludicrous. And yeah, we've had appeal decisions, but the length of time is different. And we're not sitting on that appeal. We don't know the details. So we can only go with the generalities. So let's just deal with what we've got here. Now, officers are saying that the length of time that's passed, and they go back to the original application, but I don't think that's the point where you start. The point for me is up to 2018, this applicant was ready to build a development. It was sanctioned, and it has been sanctioned by our members of staff in the planning for that time. So as little ago as 2018, this wasn't Greenbelt, this was a replacement dwelling. And that's pretty much as I view it now. Yeah, the applicant has had some health and financial issues, but he's carried along, he's gone along in preparation of building his replacement dwelling, that he's been given or led to believe that he's quite within his rights to do that. And as I say, up until 2018, there was not a problem. So when he throws in an application to be told, actually, this is now Greenbelt, you can bet your life it was met with some horror. So if I said to you, forget the Greenbelt status, if somebody then put in an application for a replacement dwelling, we'd wonder what all the fuss was about. And, you know, when we've looked at applications that have been put before this committee that have been in the Greenbelt, that we have had opportunity to say, you're too late, you're out of time, these buildings are abandoned, they've never been used for, you know, centuries or even decades. We never get that. What we get is, yeah, this is okay to build. You can build this in the Greenbelt, it's not a problem. It doesn't detract from the Greenbelt. And all that argument goes against us. You know, it's the PPF, the presumption is to build, you know, and we're talking about housing developments. I mean, we've got one a little bit later on. We've got a solar farm in the Greenbelt. Yeah, I mean, it's just ludicrous. And this is why this one seems so perverse, where we're arguing against one individual, not even a developer, one individual wanting to rebuild his home and being thwarted along the way. One house, not a series of houses, not a development, that he wants to rebuild, thought he was good up until 2018. Now suddenly we've pulled the rug from under his feet. And that's why I've asked for it to come and be decided by committee, because we are so readily given a diet and spoon-fed. Everything in the Greenbelt that comes before this committee is applicable. And now here's one that goes against a resident that just wants to build a replacement dwelling. That's why it seems perverse. So I'm arguing that this isn't Greenbelt. It's only Greenbelt in the minds of our officers who suddenly have changed the designation. Yeah, they didn't even give any warning. There's no prior warning for this stuff. So as I say, 2 years ago when the guy turns up, and he hasn't left it, he hasn't walked away since 2001 and just given up on the site. He hasn't abandoned it. He's been working towards it. 2018, he says, need a little bit more time, and they suddenly tell him it's in the Greenbelt. And then we get all the arguments being rolled out why we can't develop in the Greenbelt. So, Chairman, I'm asking members to look on this with a little bit of sympathy. Sympathy for the applicant, sympathy for the condition he finds him in. And I'm saying we should approve this, and we should approve it on the grounds, as I've said, it's a replacement dwelling. And I'm really not interested in what an inspector has to say. This is something that, you know, we are empowered to do for our residents. This seems unjust and perverse. And so I'm just urging members to look on this favourably and vote in favour for the development. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Turner, and I appreciate the comments that you've just made there. But if I could ask members in the remainder of this section of the deliberations to stick to technical questions for clarification, and then we'll go into the main deliberations after members of the public have spoken. Councillor Schrader.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hang on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. I can't tell.
Sorry, Councillor Schrader, you're crackling up on me. I'm pretty sure it's for others as well.
Apologise to you and to the committee. I should have made a declaration of it frozen on my screen. Can everyone? Oh, hang on.
We can hear you now. Yeah.
You can hear me now. Okay. Yeah, well, sorry. Yeah, I need to apologise to you and to the committee, Chairman. I should have made a declaration of interest, but it's only just now that I'm looking at the whole thing, and because of Councillor Turner's comments, that I'm realising that the applicant in question that approached Councillor Turner originally approached me. This was some years ago, I should say, and I referred him to Councillor Turner. Obviously, he's in Councillor Turner's ward and not mine, but I should probably have declared that he approached me because he is known to a family member of mine.
Sorry, Councillor Schreider, I think we've lost you. I will ask officers to note down that declaration of interest and be recorded in the minutes. Councillor Schreider, are you able to rejoin us? Okay, I will ask you again a bit later if you have any technical questions for clarification to then be able to rejoin us. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just have clarification? Councillor Turner said that we're now saying that this is on Greenbelt land. Wasn't it the building originally on Greenbelt? The original building, wasn't that classed as Greenbelt then? Could I just have clarification on that?
I'm happy to come down here.
Mr. Spears?
Yes, the site has always been within the green belt. I'm not wishing to put words into Councillor Turner's mouth, but I think what he was sort of saying was that obviously we'd granted a replacement dwelling in accordance with Greenbelt policy as a replacement dwelling in the Greenbelt. So it has always been in Greenbelt. We originally granted the replacement as a replacement of an existing dwelling on a plot of land within the Greenbelt.
That's what my understanding was, but I was a bit confused. Thank you anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Kettle? No. Parish Councillor Macpherson Davis?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Schreider, do you have any technical questions for clarification? Just for your benefit, just in case you lost us, I did ask officers to record your declaration of interest. If you have any technical questions, please now.
I don't know how much you heard of what I said, but I got booted off, so I apologise for that. As you can see, I've moved to a different room with what I hope is a slightly better connection. But yes, I wasn't aware of the possible connection to this application, but it does seem to be the same person. I guess my only technical question is, so just so I'm absolutely clear, I think I understood, but so this had an extant planning permission until 2018, is that right? Can you just I just want to make sure I'm absolutely clear on that.
Mr. Spears?
Yes, the last consent that was granted on the site was in 2015, and obviously the planning consent would last for 3 years until August 2018. That's correct.
And just again, for my own clarity, at any point, was it explained to the applicant that, as you said earlier, like if he just made a start on, put the foundations down or something, that he would be able to keep his, effectively he will have fulfilled that condition in the previous grants of permission?
No, we wouldn't have specifically gone to the applicant and told them that. I mean, obviously we get many applications, and most of them are informed by a planning agent, and obviously it's their job really to explain that to the applicant. So no, I mean we made a judgment on the application in 2018 that when it came in that we felt that they had long enough to make a start on the new development. So there wouldn't have been any specific sort of flagging up of that requirement if they wanted to sort of
Councillor Schreider, do you have any further technical questions for clarification? Councillor Romero will come to you shortly.
That's fine for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to follow on from Councillor Schreider's question there, I assume that they would have been aware of the condition for, or the requirement to build within 3 years from the conditions. Could you confirm that for me, Mr. Spears, and also that whether we would have followed that process whether we would have dealt with this process differently for any other application that came forward?
No, I mean the planning regulations require us to in general terms. I mean there are exceptions, but in general terms, a planning permission has a 3-year life in which you have to make a start on it. It used to be 5 years, and the government reduced it to 3 years. But yeah, it's 3 years, and that's standard on all applications, and it's there as a condition on the consent.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was really to do with, obviously, unless I'm missing it, I can't obviously, because we're refusing, I'm assuming we haven't attached any conditions to the application if it were to go ahead. And I was just checking that officers had conditions ready to apply to this, because I'm just concerned, obviously, if I'm looking at this, I want to know, can we apply some sort of condition in respect to permitted development and in terms of the extension, the possibility of them, if it was granted, their ability to extend the property in any way, like add a conservatory or add a kitchen extension or something.
Ms. Lyons?
Those sort of conditions have been challenged quite a lot in the High Court, and we have to have good reason to put those conditions on. So I would say that if members were minded to approve planning permission for this, then I would suggest that we bring it back to committee next time with the conditions attached to it, that we can check for reasonableness of putting those conditions on.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll now go out of session and have a member from the public address us, and I have a representative from Domino Sky Building Design Limited listed as the member of the public to address us. You'll have 3 minutes.
Mr. Neil? Neil? Oh, he's still connecting to audio. Just a moment, please. Neil?
Oh, sorry, are you there?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay.
I can't hear you. Hello?
Hello, yes, Neil, you've got 3 minutes to address the committee, and there'll be 30 seconds warning when you've got left. Thank you, you could go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair Committee. I think you've all read my speech because you've just basically spoken about everything I'm going to say, but we'll go through it anyway. My name is Neil Maguire. I am the agent for the applicant, Mr. Yao. As Mr. Spears and the members available noted, the original property was lost to a fire and subsequently demolished for safety in 2004, and not demolished to implement a previous application, and would probably still be standing today had this not happened. This is in contradiction to the appeal case noted to the committee, where demolition of a building was to implement the application and then left and not lost due to fire or other reason. The previous site history notes the client has submitted applications to discharge conditions on previous applications. We feel this has shown a commitment by the applicant to proceed with this development along with their continued expenditure on fees to make these applications. The applicant is not a developer, and as such, access to the intricacies of planning law, such as abandonment and starting an application by installing foundations on a site is not something they track on a daily basis until an approval is due to expire. And determination of 14 years being that cut-off time will, without notice on any previous application, feels harsh. Unfortunately, the client's previous applications have coincided with a number of factors, both personally, both his own ill health and having to return to his parents abroad, along with this, as a small businessman, the financial downturn in 2008-2009 delayed their ability to start the site. While we are aware these are not strictly planning issues, we feel it is important to put this extended period in context for the committee. Following the 25 application running out, it was discussed with the planning officer when the 2018 application was submitted that due to the above reasons noted, it would be reasonable to make a condition of a new approval, being that this is a final chance to proceed with a replacement dwelling under the current local plan. The client would still be willing to accept such a condition on an application should it felt effective. It should be noted that the 2018 application also had no objections from any consultees, but subsequently was still refused by the council. Later applications have since been commented on by Billericay Town Council. With regards to the application, the site is separated from the road frontage by a high tree-lined boundary that can be protected by condition and is not being proposed to be removed. The property location is set further back with access from the side road and is a small development in the context of the site and has been previously accepted to the council. As such, we feel that this does not therefore cause material harm to the outlook of the Greenbelt and recommend that it be approved with conditions as noted. Thank you.
Thank you for addressing the committee this evening. We'll now go into the main deliberation, and I'll call each member independently again. Councillor Fellows.
Yeah, it's a great shame that the gentleman has suffered hardships down the line, and I do take note of that. But we have a recommendation in front of us from our experienced officers to say that this is inappropriate in the Greenbelt. So I don't have any further clarification or points to raise, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Fellows. Councillor Kettle. You were on mute there, but I'm taking that as no points to make on this particular item.
Yeah, no points to make.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
No further points to raise. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Turner.
Yeah, I've said the bulk of it, and thank you for indulging me, Chairman. Just to answer Councillor Fellows, I think you've got to get away from Greenbelt. Yeah, that's the issue. I sound like a complete hypocrite because I'm the first to chuck Greenbelt out. But again, this is why I think this one is so weird, because up until 2018, you've heard the applicant's agent. This guy's not a developer. He's not savvy like a lot of other developers would be. And I appreciate the recommendation that officers have made. He's in good faith. I appreciate that. But here we have a chance as experts for our community to right that injustice. And I'm happy, Chairman. In fact, I would propose that we do put another 3-year deadline on it, and that's it. 3 years and you're out. If that development doesn't start within that 3-year period, then 100% we're back to Greenbelt. No qualms, no questions, no discussion, we're done. And that's why I would ask members to think seriously about allowing somebody to do this in terms of not build in the Greenbelt, but re-provide a dwelling that was lost. And that is all this application is about. Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, Councillor Schrader.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very kind of loath to set forth an argument that seeks to set aside Greenbelt considerations, particularly as I imagine that Greenbelt considerations will be germane to an application we'll be discussing later. But I do have considerable sympathy both with this case and funnily enough, Mr. Spears mentioned the case in Breakegg Hill earlier, which is actually one of my old neighbours. So I'm well familiar with the particulars of that case as well. And they are a bit unique. Well, not that unique, because they're more or less the same, but the very kind of similar niche issue whereby there was a dwelling, there was an application for a replacement dwelling that was granted without any real controversy. And then for one reason or another, the dwellings in question were demolished, in this case due to a fire, and then the personal circumstances of the applicant intervened and meant that the replacement dwelling was not constructed. And that's where we find ourselves now. So I think, on paper, the officers are absolutely right, of course. This is, they have a certain cutoff, and this is now cannot be regarded as a replacement dwelling. It's in the green belt, and it is effectively like wanting to build in the greenbelt. Except, of course, it isn't really, is it? Because there was a building, the building was demolished, and I mean, I know what I get the point that's being made. It specifies in the conditions that, you know, construction has to start within a certain time frame. We are dealing with individuals here. We're not dealing with canny developers, as Councillor Turner just said. You know, both cases, it's like one individual who just simply wasn't aware that you know, would make all the difference. And effectively, you're talking here about a guy who owns a plot of land that's now effectively worthless because he won't be able to build a home on it. Now, if it was a developer who had been land banking, you know, sitting on the site, biding his time, and wanted to build a huge development, I don't think I'd have a whole lot of sympathy. But where it's one individual with a specific set of circumstances, as Councillor Turner says, we do have it within our gift to exercise our discretion. And certainly it's not been the first time, or it wouldn't be the first time, that we've had a Greenbelt application with all the Greenbelt considerations that have been mentioned come before this committee. And this committee has made a decision to say that, well, these considerations are outweighed by other considerations. And I think in this case, as Councillor Turner points out, we have an opportunity here to use our discretion to act as you know, champions for our residents. Like I say, if this was a developer, I might feel differently about it, but as it is one individual seeking to build a replacement dwelling in accordance with a permission that only ran out a couple of years ago, I am minded to be sympathetic. I recognise there has to be some kind of cut-off, and this has, you know, given that the first permission was, I mean, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, 2001, and then the property was moved in 2004, is a long, long time ago. But, you know, life intervenes, and sometimes, you know, these things do drag on, you know, if you're affected by particular economic or, you know, family problems or health problems, that sort of thing. So I think, you know, we've got an opportunity here to use our discretion to not, you know, leave somebody out of pocket. So at this point, I'm minded to be sympathetic to the. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer.
Yes, I mean, on this as well, I mean, yesterday when I was looking at, we have a technical briefing for members of the public, and I was looking at this and I'm thinking, well, why is this being brought as an open shut case? We shouldn't be building in the green belt, unfortunate as the circumstances are. But the reason these sort of cases are brought to us is because we do have the power to use the discretion where we feel that that is actually necessary. And in these circumstances where a lot of our residents are actually going to possibly be facing financial difficulties in the future, we have to actually acknowledge that possibly this individual has had these financial issues in the past with the financial crisis. He has pleaded personal circumstances in terms of finances and health. And perhaps we have to show our human side and our caring side as a council and a committee in this respect, and to show that discretion. It is an individual, it isn't a developer with reserves. These are circumstances that could possibly bankrupt a household, having a fire and not being able to accomplish what they would like to do in terms of replacing the property. We have seen situations come to us before where we have used our discretion in the green belt as well. I don't want to bring up too many individual cases, but we've taken into consideration family circumstances in respect of a family and not wanting to move the family away from moving a child that was dependent on particular health services or schooling from the area. We've taken those into account. So we've used this discretion before. I don't want to go Dickensian on this and talk about what the law is or the law isn't. But it does feel unfair to this individual if we were to just look at it in a black and white way, especially when we've had situations where there have been barns that are purely for agricultural use and have it looked okay in terms of the greenfield because they looked okay in a Constable painting, but suddenly okay to redevelop as huge big houses or flats and in the green belt. Where here we're actually talking, there was a single dwelling before of the same size, of the same volume. And actually, because of a technicality, these people may not be able to replace their dwelling. I think these special circumstances exist, and we've got to exercise our leniency on this. So I will be exercising my leniency, and I will be in favour of this development, voting for this development. But I obviously would like to see these conditions put in place in terms of the time, and also in terms of what is and what isn't allowed, with the officer's discretion in terms of permitted development, because obviously what we don't want is it to go far beyond the footprint of this property in the future by another generation of owners. Thank you.
Thank you. Parish Councillor McPherson Davis.
Thank you. I'm going against Billericay Town Council's comments in that I feel very sympathetic towards this application, and I would fully support Councillor Turner's comments and proposals.
Thank you. If there's no further members of the committee that wish to address the committee on this item, I'm going to set out my position. And I've listened to the comments of members here tonight. I listened to the agent for the applicant, and I understand the personal circumstances, but I also understand the report that's in front of us, the policies that sit behind that here at the council. And Councillor Schrader made the point earlier on that on paper the officers are correct with their report that we see, and in practice we've also seen that being demonstrated by the inspectorate as well, with their comments about very special circumstances in another application that wasn't able to take that into consideration and said that that's not a planning matter. So with that in mind, we don't make the Greenbelt rules. We have the MPPF that's there to guide us. This is against the allowing this development would go against that. So I will be voting with the recommendation tonight. So we'll now proceed to the recommendation on page 61, the planning application number 20/00291/full be refused planning permission for the reasons set out at the end of the report on page 68. Councillor Fellows.
Yes, I agree with the officer's recommendation, and I would refuse this application.
Thank you. Councillor Kettle. Sorry, Councillor Kettle, you're on mute.
I keep forgetting to press the button. Yeah. Yes, I agree with Councillor Fellows. Recommendations and what he just said.
So you're voting in favour of, just for clarification, you're voting in favour of the recommendation?
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Reid. Sorry, Councillor Reid, you're on mute.
Favour.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Yeah, I'll be voting against, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Schrader.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Rimmer.
Against.
And I will also be voting against. So with 4 votes to 3, the recommendation is carried. The planning application number 20/002.
Sorry, Chairman, you just voted with us.
So I'm voting against the. I'm voting in favour of the recommendation, as I set out earlier on. So the planning application, so that has been carried. The planning application number 20/00291/full has been refused planning permission for the reasons set out at the end of the report. We now proceed on to agenda item number 7, planning application number 20/00376/VAR at Outwood Farm Road in Billericay. That's on page 73 to 89 of your agenda. And I'll hand over to Ms. Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. Evening, councillors. This application before you now is a Section 73 application. So it's a variation of conditions on an application that has previously been granted consent, and it refers to the site of the solar farm in Outwood Farm Road, which was before the Planning Committee back in 2014. With a recommendation for refusal, which the committee just determined to overturn on that evening and gave approval. As you can see from the site plan that's in front of you, which I hope you can see, you should be able to see the red part of the development, which is in place on site, that has commenced and been installed, and that's I'm going to call that phase 1 this evening. And then you've got the blue section, which is what we're looking at really tonight, in terms of how they want to vary the conditions and increase the length of time that can be present. So the site, as you'll see, is to the between Billericay and South Green. It's within the green belt, and as I said, it's been basically on site and generating electricity since March 2016 for that first phase. Since the application was before the committee originally, we have had further applications to make slight amendments and to also have 2 more applications of varying the conditions to do with the time length. So we've had 2 increases previously, which is laid out in the report for you. Tonight, the proposal before you is to increase the length of time that phase 2 can be implemented and put on the site for 35 years. Now, during the determination of the planning committee back in November 2014, it was determined that it was inappropriate development within the Greenbelt and that very special circumstances would be needed to be demonstrated to override the normal presumption against such development. The committee determined on that evening that they weighed up the balance of the benefits of the amount of renewable energy that was going to be generated against the impacts on the locality and the local landscape and Greenbelt, and determined that it was a finally balanced decision, but put great weight on the fact that it was going to be for a temporary period and gave permission for 26 years. And also taking into account the fact that there was a decommissioning condition, so that the site would go back at that end of that time back to how it was before. So this application before you tonight seeks to vary conditions to enable the development to take place in 2 phases, with as I said, an increased lifespan of phase 2 for 35 years. There was recently an application that came in which was withdrawn to increase it to 40 years. So the agent has gone away and come back with an application reducing it by 5 years. This would mean that phase 2 of the solar farm would have a lifespan of 35 years from the first export of the electricity generated, or 38 years from the decision, whichever is the sooner of the 2. It doesn't propose any changes to phase 1, which is in place at the moment, which has a lifespan of 30 years, which would run out in 2046. So as I said, this is an application for section 73 to vary conditions. So it has to be acknowledged that the principle of the development has already been given, and that consideration therefore should focus on the temporary time period and the decommissioning conditions that it relates to, taking into account the reasons why those conditions were put on in the first place, and to do with the impact on the Greenbelt, and therefore consider what the impact will be of increasing the lifespan of phase 2 in this Greenbelt location up until 2058, which is the latest that it could possibly be there until under this application. We, as officers, we've looked at this and the planning history and considered it, and it is difficult because it's a planning balance, because there is no definition of temporary really in planning, and it's where do you draw the line and what kind of weight you're going to put on that this evening. As officers, we think the temporary nature of the proposal here should only be given limited weight. We believe that the original 26 years was a considerable amount of time. It's a third of somebody's lifespan effectively. And we consider that by extending it to now 35-year consent, after we've already allowed previous additions, that this takes it, and this is a significant amount of time. And we don't believe that there are very special circumstances that would really outweigh the harm that this would have for that length of period on the openness of this Greenbelt site. We have had during the consultation periods 3 objections from members of the public concerned with the fact that this is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, that it was originally granted for a specific amount of time, and that was the weight given to that was quite strong at the committee as a reason for justifying this development in the Greenbelt. We've had, and the comments are laid out in the report for you, but people are saying that the 35 years cannot be considered as temporary. The that large-scale solar farms should be sited on previously developed land or land of areas of less importance within the rural landscape. And the need for a permanent end date to ensure that decommissioning can take place. Obviously, having that is the fact that this can be removed from the site at some time in the future is obviously a thing to take into account in your decision making this evening. But it's where you draw the line in terms of its degree of permanence and the impact that this would have on the Greenbelt. National planning policy guidance is clear that inappropriate development is harmful by definition in the Greenbelt. And it also states that elements of many renewable energy projects will comprise inappropriate development, and in such cases developers will need to demonstrate very special circumstances if projects are to proceed. Such very special circumstances can include environmental benefits such as the production of renewable energy resources. So here, and thank you, Charles, the site, the location plan in front of you, you can see there that the solar farm's marked on the Ordnance Survey plan there. And then if you go back to the aerial photo, Charles, thank you, you can see there that you can see the phase 1 that's been implemented, and you can see there. And then obviously the phase 2 would be further to the south of that. So yeah, so tonight it's a planning judgment to make really on whether or not you believe that the period of time to lengthen this to 35 years, whether or not that would be outweighed, the harm would be outweighed by the environmental benefits of having renewable energy generated from this site for a substantial period of time. These are just some of the site photos to show you the existing solar farm. You've got footpaths to the south and to the north that we walked and visited the site, and you can see the glimpses in the distance there of the arrays that are present at the moment. Thank you, Charles. So I'd refer you to the recommendation for refusal, which is on page 86 of your report this evening. And I'll be happy to answer any queries you have or clarification that you're seeking. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Pearce. I'll now invite members to come forward with technical questions for clarification. Councillor Fellows.
Thank you, Chair. I have no technical questions.
Councillor Rimmer.
Yeah, again, I think it's about, I mean, this case of permanence and this sort of debate about permanence or temporary, and the sort of precedence that's been set for this. I don't know if I was on that original planning committee whether I would have actually agreed to the open belt being used, the green belt being used in this way, because I am concerned about the openness of the green belt. But it has been. I mean, there are solar panels there already, and permission is already in place. They can build them, and they can be in place for a set period of time. So I'm interested to know about the precedents around permanence. I'm also, obviously, the cost of energy and has dropped and fluctuates. And in terms of financial sustainability of the actual project, you can understand why that might be a reason why they might need to extend it to actually make it viable. So I'm just thinking how much weight we should be giving to that as well in terms of the viability of the business plan for what they've proposed, since it's already had some consent based on a previous business plan.
Ms. Pearce, do you wish to come back on any of those points raised there?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why it was that we had the variation conditions in the past was because of the viability issue, and they're saying that they needed it was 30 years and that they needed to make it viable since the changes were made and they were unsubsidized. So that is one of the arguments that the agent has put forward, and that's the reasoning behind wanting this additional time period to make it viable. Obviously, they've still got an existing consent in place, so they could actually put this in now, and it would last there until to 2051. But they're saying that they need an operational lifetime span that's longer than that for them to be able to effectively get the funds in place. So, okay.
Councillor Rimmer.
So obviously we know there's been these external factors in terms of change of government policy in terms of the subsidy that's actually given to this form of energy supply. And there's obviously the economic conditions as well. So it's are these things that it sounds like they've been things we've given weight to in the past, if that's fair to say, in terms of the conditions, in terms of the previous extensions. Is this something we can still give weight to?
Ms. Pearce?
Yeah, I think it's one where you're going to have to make that balancing judgment as to whether or not the benefits of having renewable energy generated from that phase 2 that isn't on site at the moment, and whether or not the long-term benefits of having that energy generated in terms of the additional time period that they want to get the funding in place for it, whether or not you feel that together outweighs the harm that would be caused to the green belt from the development being in place for that period of time.
Thank you. Councillor Schrader.
I have no technical questions, but I note smugly that I said back in 2014 that this would not be able to sustain itself. So I'm not surprised that that is the case.
Councillor Turner.
Nothing for me, Chairman.
Councillor Reid.
Me either. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Kettle.
No technical questions from me, Mr. Chairman.
Parish Councillor McPherson Davis.
No technical questions from me.
Thank you. We have one member of the public wishing to address the committee this evening, Kirsty Lodge, who will have 3 minutes to address the committee, so we'll now go out of session.
Hello, Kirsty. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, you could address the committee now. You've got 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. As set out in the officer's report, Outwood Solar Farm has been partially constructed and the principle of temporary development in this location has already been established through existing planning consents. The construction of the scheme was put on hold pending securing funding for the unsubsidised element of the site, which is now known as Phase 2. Current permission allows for 30 operational years. However, to meet the necessary funding requirements to complete the development, a minimum operational life of 35 years is now required. This requires an amendment to conditions 1 and 2 of the existing consent. In accordance with the planning practice guidance, the local authority must only consider the conditions that are subject to the application. A local planning authority decision to refuse an application can and will be appealed to the Secretary of State, who will also only consider the conditions in question. The key issue for members in determining this application is therefore limited to the proposed lifetime extension and whether very special circumstances exist to outweigh any harm to the green belt. Paragraph 147 of the NPPF is clear in stating that very special circumstances may include the wider environmental benefits associated with increased production of energy from renewable sources. As you are aware, we in the UK are at a time of climate emergency with a strong national direction of travel towards becoming net zero by 2050. The planning balance is strengthening in favour of the encouragement of renewable energy development and securing substantial reduction in CO2 emissions. The development will play a key part in continuing to generate renewable energy and contribute to the reduction in CO2 emissions to help meet this 2050 target, which would amount to very special circumstances and should be afforded significant weight. There's no definition in planning of what length of term is temporary. However, case law and planning guidance are clear that when assessing the impacts of a proposal on the openness of the Greenbelt, the duration of the development and its remediability are to be taken into account when assessing harm within the planning balance. Given that the development is time limited, would be removed and the land restored, therefore returning it to an equivalent state of openness, it is argued that the proposal would by definition still be considered temporary, and that any harm would be outweighed by the important contribution the site would make at both a local and national level, in line with the provisions of the NPPF and Climate Change Act. Taking the above into account, it would seem completely counterintuitive to the UK's direction of travel to refuse an extension of this already consented and part constructed solar farm. Therefore, planning permission should be granted. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for addressing the committee this evening. We're now going to the main deliberation on this application. Councillor Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can imagine what my decision would have been if I'd have been on the planning committee those years ago. How many times do these people come back? It's a business case. Yeah, we agreed, then we've extended it, and I don't know how many times we've extended it. If it's not a viable business case, as Councillor Schrader accurately predicted some years ago, it's a business decision. We have shops closing the length and breadth of this country. We don't have them banging on our doors. No, I think that we've given the decision back then, and personally, I see no reason to vary that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reid.
I agree with Councillor Fellows. I don't see any reason to actually extend. You know, it's still got a long life at the moment, and it is a business proposition. And you know, I feel that we've made a decision, and we should stick with that decision.
Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Schrader.
Thank you, Chairman. I have the dubious distinction, I think, along with my parish colleague, Councillor Macpherson Davis, of being, along with him, the only other veteran of the 2014 committee here tonight. Obviously, the principle of this development is not an issue tonight, though it is germane to an extent. Though I was strongly of the view then, and I remain strongly of the view now, that the committee erred 6 years ago. The officer recommendation was to refuse, and it is important to recognise that the principle that was not conceded at the time was that this is an inappropriate development within the Greenbelt. That was the case in 2014, and it remains the case today. The committee's decision 6 years ago was entirely contingent on the permission being temporary. I mean, this was one of the occasions when this committee did choose to exercise its discretion in a matter concerning the Greenbelt, and in a way that I thought was completely wrong-headed. But, you know, my colleagues on the committee at that time were suckered in by the green energy argument into accepting that there were exceptional circumstances. But it was the supposed temporariness that ameliorated the harm to the openness and permanence of the Greenbelt. That was for a 26-year operation. So there was to be no permanent harm to the Greenbelt. That was the argument. So that is effectively the question upon which, it seems to me, the determination of this application entirely rests. And the question arises, at what point does temporary become permanent? Now, this is a very large area of Greenbelt, and it was under the existing permission to be lost until 2040. But they've had several extensions, which I predicted at the time they would need, because all the public policy was moving against them, all the various pots of cash that they were relying on were going away. So, this could now be, what is it? Either the officer will correct me if I'm wrong, but like 2060 or whatever it is. I mean, I'll be 78 then. In my opinion, this makes a mockery of the supposed temporariness of this development. So the bottom line for me is that this application will harm the openness of the Greenbelt. Structures that stand for 40 odd years are no less harmful than those. These extensions are in my opinion, an abuse of the planning system. Your variations of a variation of a variation. And I'm just reading here for the original permission stated, and I quote, "The circumstances and retention of the use for more than a temporary period would fail to comply with the National Planning Policy Framework." So it seems to me that the decision was wrong 6 years ago, and it becomes more wrong with each variation. So I would urge the committee to end this cycle and reject the application to vary the conditions. In my opinion, that we as a local planning authority should not entertain variations if their impacts constitute an appropriate harm in the green. And I would ask members to consider the landscape value of the site, which was a completely open rural area of Greenbelt, the openness and permanence of which is being irreparably harmed by this development. My opinion is that I am totally in favour of the officer recommendation, and I would urge colleagues to support it as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer.
I'm minded to vote against the officer recommendation on this. And actually, on the format of a digital meeting, we're at a disadvantage in one sense, because it's harder to have this openness of debate and to listen to each other. We're sort of going in this structure, somebody speaks first. And so there might be people who've said that they intend to vote one way, but it's giving them the chance to change their mind once they've heard the whole of the committee as well. But that's where we are, I guess. But I hope people could change their mind on this. It's this very point about the 5 years. When this goes to appeal, and the developer has just indicated they would take this to appeal if we refuse the application, it will just be decided on the 5-year extension. They've already got the 30 years for phase 2. This will be whether 5 years extra to actually make it a sustainable, viable financial business plan would actually give detrimental harm to the green belt or not would be the test. I think it would fail that test. I think the planning inspector would actually go on the developer's side on this if they can show that the economic conditions have actually changed to that extent. And I totally agree with everybody else in terms of the decision I would have made in 2014, but that's not what I'm being asked to do here. I've been asked to make a decision on an extension of a part of a project and from 30 years to 35 years.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, somebody's talking.
If we just make sure microphones are off, please. Carry on, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. So this additional 5 years that's being asked about, or I just think in reality, I can't see how we could possibly refuse that.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer. Councillor Turner?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't criticise anybody for approving it in 2014 or whenever, because I think situations were different then. As it happens, I think the UK is pretty self-sufficient now on wind and solar power. And I keep reading in the paper that we haven't burnt coal or fossil fuels for months at a time now. So what contribution this is making, and it is making a contribution, you have to wonder. but we're not here to provide anybody with a balance sheet and a business case. In my mind, even though I am more of an environmentalist today than I was back then, the decision was wrong to put it in the green belt back then. It wasn't a good use of green belt. There were other opportunities to site these facilities elsewhere. Rooftops, offices, those sort of applications, get them out of the way. You know, in a piece of green belt, not good. And okay, we get threatened with this by applicants, don't we? About we're going to take you to appeal, and yeah, we'll live with that. So off you trot to the Secretary of State. Clearly, this has got to foul. This issue of temporary is going to be one that's going to roll out all the time. They've done it. They've done it today. They've done it yesterday. They'll do it tomorrow. And it won't be 35 years or whatever, it will be a lifetime. And it's just not acceptable. So the only recourse for that is agree with the officer recommendation and kick it out and find a better use for Greenbelt than we've currently got. Thank you, Chairman.
Parish Councillor Macpherson Davis.
Thank you. Yes, I was on that committee back in whenever it was, Councillor Schrouder, and we both said what the problem was then, and it's come home to roost now. It's not financially viable. We're not here to decide on a financial viability. We're here to decide on a planning application. And therefore, I thoroughly endorse the officer's recommendation for refusal.
Thank you, Parish Councillor Macpherson Davis. If there's no other members that wish to speak, I'll set out my position. And there is once in every planning meeting where I say to Councillor Rimmer that he could have read my notes that were in front of me, and that time is now. That this is still, in some ways, a temporary application because there is a definitive time limit that's on it. And I refer members to paragraph 147 of the NPPF on page 80, where it says, when located in the Greenbelt, elements of renewable energy projects will comprise inappropriate development. In such cases, developers will need to demonstrate very special circumstances if projects are to proceed. Such special circumstances may include wider environmental benefits associated with increased production of energy from renewable sources. Now, that combined with the additional time period, which at this stage is only an additional 5 years, I'm not convinced will stand up to an appeal inspector. So with that in mind, and I do it very rarely, I will be voting against the recommendation this evening, which we will now proceed on to. That planning application number 20/00376/VAR be refused planning permission for the reasons set out at the end of the report. Councillor Kettle.
Yeah, I've done it. Yeah, I refuse it.
So you're going in favour of the recommendation?
No.
So you're voting against the recommendation?
Yes,
so,
sorry.
So, yeah. So voting against the recommendation. Councillor Fellows?
I'm voting in favour of the recommendation to reject this application for extension.
Thank you. Councillor Reid?
In favour.
Councillor Turner?
In favour, Chairman.
Councillor Schroeder?
Very strongly in favour.
Councillor Rimmer?
Against.
I'm also voting against. So with 4 votes to 3, that has carried that planning application number 20/00376/VAR has been refused planning permission for the reasons set out on the report. We now proceed on to agenda item number 8, planning application number 19/01717/Full Silver Lodge Kennels, Hofields Avenue in Wickford, which is on page 91 to 108 of your agenda.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this application is to demolish existing kennels and a store building and construct a detached 4-bedroom bungalow at Silver Lodge Kennels in Wickford. It's located on the east side of Hofields Avenue, as you can see on the aerial view in front of you. The area is semi-rural in character with a mix of detached bungalows, gypsy and traveller plots and vacant grassland plots. The kennels there, there's been a history of planning applications and permissions for kennels on the site since 1949. The current kennels building dates from 1974. Next slide, please, Charles. That's the location plan, so you can see it's within a wider holding owned by the applicant. Next slide, please. That's just the existing elevation showing the long, low kennel building and the adjoining carport garage structure to be demolished. Can you go to the next slide, please, for some photos? The sun was quite low in the sky when I took these, but you can just see the low building there. It's about 2.1 meters high. Next slide, please. And there's the garage building, which is partly dilapidated. Next slide, please. This is the interior of the kennels. It can accommodate about 54 dogs, if I recall, on the approved planning permission from 1974. It hasn't been used for a few years, but it could be reinstated as a working kennels now for that number of dogs. Next slide, please. That's just the interior of the quadrangle, looking back at the kennels. And another one, please, Charles. And another one. And that's a view just from the entrance to the site. Can you go to the next slide, please? That's the adjacent Silver Lodge bungalow. That replaced another bungalow on the adjoining site in 2017. Next slide, please. So, as you can see, this is the proposed site layout. The existing kennels and garage are dotted at the bottom right of your screen, and the new bungalow is proposed in red. As with a lot of the other schemes, it is within the green belt. There is a presumption against inappropriate development within the green belt. A local planning authority should regard the construction of new buildings as inappropriate. Exceptions to this include the partial or complete redevelopment of previously developed land, whether redundant or in continuing use, which would not have a greater impact on the openness of the land than the existing development. The existing kennels have a floor area of about 330 square meters and a cubic volume of 700 cubic meters. The proposed bungalow would be roughly half that, about 170 square meters and 620 cubic meters, so slightly lower than volume than existing structures, albeit they would be a taller structure at 5.2 meters high compared to the kennels and garage of 2.1 meters and 3.1 meters respectively. Could you go to the next slide, please? I think I do have the elevations. Yeah, so there's the new bungalow. It's very similar to the Silver Lodge bungalow that was built in 2017 on the adjoining site. Important material considerations are that the council lost an appeal for a similar type of scheme at Jessamine Kennels, 120 metres to the south of this site, which the applicant in that case sought permission to demolish a bungalow and kennels and replace it with two bungalows. And that was allowed on appeal by the inspector. And in that time, he said he considered the bungalow would enhance the sense of openness compared to the kennel blocks that were being demolished, in that case at Jessamine. If you go to the next slide, please. There's the floor plan. And the next slide. There is some history on the wider site. The land to the north of the application site, which is at the bottom of the screen. I'll scroll on to the next slide in a minute so you can see it in relation to this enforcement plan. There has been some gypsy and traveller plots constructed on the site in 2016. The council served enforcement notices, sorry, not on the immediate application site, but on the land immediately to the north within the applicant's ownership. That was, an enforcement notice was served on that in 2016 and a High Court injunction obtained. The enforcement notices went to appeal. That was a split decision was issued. Basically, the grey area highlighted, the inspector upheld that appeal in relation to the removal of hard standings and road scalpings in the grey area, but did allow the appeal in relation to the retention of a day room in the top left, cross-hatched, and a stables in the bottom right, cross-hatched, along with some hard standing that is hatched and the provision of two caravans on that land at the front of the wider site there. If you scroll to the next slide, Charles, you'll see it in relation to our site. So if you can scroll between the two, you can see that the location plan of the proposed site doesn't prejudice the enforcement appeal decision. So at what point at which point the council decides to enforce the outstanding enforcement notice doesn't prejudice the council's determination of this current application for replacement, for the construction of a bungalow in place of the kennels on the Silver Lodge Kennels site. The applicant is not seeking to use gypsy and traveller status as very special circumstances to justify the development, which is being purely assessed on its individual merits based on the removal of the existing kennels and garage structure. The application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions outlined on page 99 of the agenda. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Humphreys. We're now going to technical questions for clarification, and unless Kemi corrects me if I'm wrong, there are no members of the public wishing to address us on this item. Councillor Fellows.
So thank you, Chairman. So just to confirm, this particular plot is a totally legal plot. There is no enforcement, or they've complied with all the laws of this land.
The enforcement notice is if you go back one slide, Charles, whilst it highlighted the land edged in red, so the injunction which covers the whole of that land edged in red prohibits the stationing of caravans or portable structures, whereas the enforcement notice that was upheld relates only to the grey area in relation to hard standing, scalpings, and also the plots. So if you go back down again, sorry, Charles, to the next slide, you can see that the application site is not prejudiced, does not prejudice the enforcement of those enforcement notices.
Okay.
The kennels, sorry, Councillor, the kennels themselves have got a lawful planning permission, like I say, dating back to 1974.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fellows. Councillor Schrader.
Sorry. Yeah, I've no technical questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turner.
So just to be clear, this is an application in existing greenbelt, and we're being told we've got to go with it because there was another case similar, and the appeal inspector decided that we were wrong to refuse it. Is that the gist of it?
No, Councillor Turner. As you pointed out with the previous case where we quoted appeal decisions, the position here is it's previously developed land, and therefore there is a very special circumstance which we can look at development meeting greenbelt requirements as appropriate development. What we've put in front of you is a similar decision that looks at a similar position with regard to previous developed land within this location that assists you in that decision making. So I wouldn't say, I'm not asking you to say because one's approved, the other one must be approved. We're basically saying that PDL, pre-developed land, is a reason that you step aside from making development inappropriate in the Greenbelt. And what we've said is we're giving you a decision that may assist you with that position. So I'm not saying that you have to make that decision. It's up to you on the weight and the balance you want to put against pre-developed land. But there's been a decision which was refused at planning committee on this grounds, and it was won on appeal, and that's why it's been put in there, because it may assist you in that decision making.
Well, it sounds like you're splitting hairs there, because why put the appeal in there? But as it turns out, the kennels there, when were they last used?
I couldn't tell you. It's been several years, Councillor.
It's been decades, hasn't it? If we're honest, yeah. I
don't know.
It's been decades. We know it has. And you don't have to ask too many people to find that out. The fact is that, you don't have to wait long to see the perverseness of all this. Here's a set of kennels that are falling down around our ears, haven't been used for years and years. So by all means, they're abandoned, redundant, whatever you want. And here we are being given a decision that recommends approval. It's outrageous.
Sorry,
this is not even a piece of land that officers decided that it's now Greenbelt. It's always been Greenbelt. Yet here we are saying this one's okay. We can go with this one. Yeah, we don't have to change this back into Greenbelt from permitted development. And oh, by the way, we think you should approve it because there was a case some time ago and the council lost that case. So all in all, make it easy on ourselves and let us have your approval to let somebody build in the Greenbelt. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Rimmer.
I don't have any technical questions. Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
No technical questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Kettle.
I have no technical questions.
Parish Councillor McPherson Davis.
No questions.
Thank you. We'll now go into the main deliberation as we have no members of the public wishing to address the committee. Councillor Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yep, it's Greenbelt. I disagree with, regrettably, with what the officers said in the report, that it's not imposing on the openness. It's by volume, it's larger, and in fact, it's up to. I convert things to the old imperial system so I can get an accurate gauge. It's about 10'4" higher than the existing kennels. So I would argue that it does impact the openness of the Greenbelt. And in that note, then I can't see myself supporting the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kettle.
No questions.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. I'm assuming there was no comments to make there. I couldn't hear you correctly there, Councillor Reid. Councillor Rimmer.
Yes, well, what's going on tonight, eh? This is the sort of first Greenbelt development, and here's Councillor Rimmer saying, yeah, okay, let's do it. I actually looking at this and thinking, yeah, I appreciate this is really, we've seen cases like this before. We've seen it stretched in terms of the imagination where we've had barns and actually the properties have been at a different angle, have had bigger bulk and volume. I think I'm right in saying that there's elements of this plan that's actually smaller. And in terms of height, we'd expect something that's a dwelling for humans to be higher than a dwelling for dogs, you know, but I would suggest. So I have no problem with this, and I accept this planning application and go with the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Schrader.
Thank you. I'm not sure I have a huge amount to add to what Councillor Turner just said. Again, it's one of these things where I think that the balance here is out of kilter, and I think that's probably all I have to say about it. Thank you.
Councillor Turner.
Yeah, well, Chair, you've seen it. We're making it up as we go along. We change land that wasn't Greenbelt into Greenbelt just because we feel like it. And here we are, because we feel like it, we'll say, oh, well, it's easier not to oppose this one. And of course, the situations couldn't be more different. You know, we've got a piece of Greenbelt there that's got derelict buildings on there. And we've seen them come before us. And I've argued in the past, if they're not being used anymore, then they should revert back to Greenbelt. But we don't seem to be fed that. We seem to be fed, well, a developer, somebody wants to change it into a set of units. You know, we've got to have some consistency here, because otherwise it just descends into farce. And we've seen it firsthand tonight. I won't be voting for this. And I would urge all members, you know, not to go under the threat of an appeal to the Secretary of State or otherwise. You know, let's try and be consistent with the way that we dispose of our responsibilities. And this one clearly is a reject, not an accept. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Parish Councillor McPherson Davis.
No comment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I've listened to the application, I've read through the report and listened to members of the committee tonight. And the two things that really stick out to me is the fact that there is already a building on this land already, and we have to take previous developed land into consideration. We don't have the power to revert things back to their original use. That's not in the gift of this committee. The other material consideration is the appeal, and I thank the officers for including that within the report, because it's, while it's not it shouldn't inform our judgment, it is a material consideration that we have to look at, and very similar circumstances, and that was allowed. And overturned the decision of the committee on a previous application. So I will be voting with the recommendation this evening. So we'll go to the recommendation: the planning application number 19/01717/4 be granted planning permission subject to conditions at the end of the report, which is contained on page 100, 99 to 100. Councillor Kettle, how are you voting?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Fellows?
Against.
Councillor Rimmer?
For.
Councillor Schrader?
Against.
Councillor Turner?
Against.
Councillor Reid?
For.
And I will also be voting for. So with 4 votes to 3, that has carried. We now proceed on to agenda item number 9, enforcement and planning appeals update on page 109 to 112 of the agenda. Does any member wish to ask any questions? I'll just do this on a show of hands as opposed to going round to each member individually. If any member has any questions, please raise your hand. Ms. Lyons, is there anything you want to say on the appeals?
No, it's not at all, no.
Okay, that is just for noting. I'm working on the assumption there are no member that wishes to address the committee on the appeals or enforcement update. In which case that concludes our meeting tonight. Thank you all for your attendance and input. I'd also like to, on behalf of the committee, thank the officers for their work in setting up this meeting online, and also in allowing members of the public to directly engage the committee. And also particular thanks to Karina for doing the timekeeping, which I think was very efficient tonight as well. So thank you to everybody. Enjoy what is left of your evening.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Take care. Stay safe.
Oh no.